When organizations face poor web performance, challenges building modern applications at scale, or need to reduce operational and development costs, they turn to Fastly. Fastly's distributed edge network means your business can unleash its growth potential without worrying about scaling your infrastructure, whether growth of users, transaction volume, or geographic expansion. Get the speed, security, and edge cloud innovation you need to deliver profitable and engaging experiences. Visit securityweekly.com/Fastly for more information or to speak to an expert.
Hi folks, I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see, a couple of quick announcements. Register for an official cybersecurity summit by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit even, and use the code SECWEEK23. Also, make sure you subscribe to Below the Surface, a podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. Myself and Scott Schefferman host this show. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, including Zeno Kova and Richard Hughes. You can find all of the amazing episodes at eclipsium.com/podcast. Mr. Lee Neely has joined us. Lee, welcome.
Hey, good to be here. And it's freaking Wednesday night, hump day.
Hump day.
And with the weird weather, I'm reminded of the snowman who couldn't withdraw from his accounts because they were frozen.
What kind of weird weather are you having out there?
Well, today it's just cold and no rain, but just a little north of me, we're getting snow still.
Wow,
that's weird.
You getting any of the smoke from up north?
90.
Did you get any of the smoke from up north?
Not this time.
Not this time.
A couple weeks ago, yeah, or at least hail.
We're still getting it.
Wow, you can see actually that I'm not wearing any pants in that camera shot. So,
Look at the leg. Look at the leg.
The lower half is never on camera. Look, I don't even have shoes on. Come on. You gotta warn me before we have those kind of camera angles.
Where's the apron for the table
I know,
when you need it?
the apron for the
Where's
table.
the tan? I want to know where the tan is.
Right?
Where's the tan?
Pasty white. It's terrible.
It's
terrible.
horrible. Please switch to a different angle.
I wanted to talk about Gigabyte, though, because Lee had that story. It's funny. We were talking about in prep for the show, and Jeff's asked me if I knew about this story, and that's why I'm like, no. I'm like, Gigabyte I know about, because I was like, Jeff, I got to go write some slides, because I'm giving a webinar tomorrow for Eclipsium. So you go to eclipsium.com. You can actually register for that if you're listening live. It's happening tomorrow. But, and I'm like, the webinar's, ironically enough, on the Gigabyte hack, because it was our researchers that found it. So
let's talk Gigabyte.
That is cool.
Ask away.
What's the Gigabyte, Paul?
Well, let Lee tee it up first.
All right, Lee, tee it up.
So this was actually when I picked up a couple of days ago. I'd almost forgotten about it, but there was there was a whole bunch in the Gigabyte motherboards. There was a vulnerability, another UEFI firmware update risk, and what is it? They put it in. They're able to stick a piece of code on the computer when it's booting, and that code then can run another, rather than download another piece of software, and because it's in the UEFI, rebooting, power cycling, it comes back, which it's kind of cool. What really got me was that you're like, your firmware is saying, here, Windows, run this, and it's a fairly high level of privilege and isolation when it does it.
Yeah, that's correct. It's interesting. Some of the history behind that is that in 2012, with the release of Windows 8, Microsoft created the Windows platform binary table and the method for which a firmware vendor can run code inside of Windows. Because Microsoft said, I don't know if it was Microsoft that said this, but basically they're like, look, if we leave this to all of the OEMs and firmware vendors, they're going to create their own ridiculous ways. It's not going to be standard because they're going to want to run code within Windows. And since they're executing for the operating system, they totally can. So let's give them this way through WPBT using ACPI tables to be able to do that. And essentially the little lower level of how that works is UEFI comes up. The binary actually lives in UEFI that you want to run in Windows. There's a UEFI process. UEFI writes that to the hard drive. There's a UEFI process that kicks off in Dixie stage that loads that from the hard drive into memory. And in memory is where it lives in that WPBT table. And then there's an SMSMS, a Windows process that then takes that from memory and runs it as a Windows service with really high privileges. So when we say it's a vulnerability or it's a backdoor, that phase of it, I'm kind of like, it's really just a bootkit. Like that's what a bootkit does when we look at Mosaic Regressor and all these other bootkits.
So it's a feature.
It's a feature. It is absolutely a feature.
Okay.
It is a backdoor feature.
So that's enough on Gigabyte. Let's move on.
No, but that's just the first stage. That's just stage one.
I tried.
The vulnerabilities that I think, Lee, you were hinting towards are in the process that actually runs once it's in Windows. This Gigabyte update service, ironically enough.
Where's that pesky process word again?
Right? The service that runs, executable it's running, is ironically to update other things. But it reaches out to 3 different URLs in order to download more payloads, essentially. Kind of like how malware works, right? You got your first stage loader and your second stage loader. Well, the second stage loader in this case...
Why 3? Is it just like bandwidth, just like load balancing?
No,
why 3?
These are just like URLs that were in various versions of the updater. So one, it reaches out over HTTP.
I'm not satisfied with that answer, though. But keep going.
Yeah, anyway.
Whatever.
There was 3. One was HTTP, which
I think you better refresh Jeff's drink.
Yeah.
Already done.
Obviously, so if your computer is reaching out to a website over HTTP and retrieving a binary and executing it, an attacker can go man in the middle without SSL getting in the way. The other 2 were HTTPS. Funny thing about that is they didn't fully check all of the certificates, so you can still man in the middle those processes. One of the URLs wasn't a fully qualified domain name. It was actually like a host name, which you could easily put in various places and manipulate way easier than you could a fully qualified domain name. So to get in the middle.
So it sounds like the exploit is kind of cool, but it's lame because they're not doing a lot of security checks.
It's exploiting something lame.
Screw with it.
It's exploiting something pretty lame.
The vulnerability is lame.
Yes.
I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it also sounds like I had wondered when I first was reading about this, would this only work with Windows, or if I stuck another OS on a jacked up board, would it have any luck? And it sounds like only with Windows.
It's only, the binary inside of the firmware is a Windows binary.
Yeah. And so on the other hand, because it's doing that download, you might have your perimeter sealed up when my laptop's at work if I'm jacked up. But if I take it home where I don't have that same perimeter defense,
correct,
game on, right?
Yeah, one of our recommendations is to block those 3 URLs so it can't pull anything else down. Right. But obviously, if you're moving around or whatever, there are other recommendations. There's things you can do inside of Windows. It's on the Eclipsium.com blog. That we wrote about it, the other recommendations. We'll also link you to another one that we wrote before I was there in September of 21. Everyone Gets a Rootkit, where we wrote even more extensively about WPBT and found other vulnerabilities with WPBT. Because there's also the signing issue too. Like Windows binaries that run should be signed. And the original binary is signed, but the things it's pulling down are not signed. And not checked for any kind of validation. So there's that kind of mess too. Myself and John Lucades will talk about this in even more excruciating detail tomorrow for those that are interested. If you're listening to this and it's after tomorrow, and you're like, crap, I missed it, I'll let you know a little secret. We post those to our YouTube channel. So if you go to eclipsium.com and you go to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see our YouTube video. And John Lucades is amazing. He's been doing this firmware stuff for a lot longer than I have. So I'm excited. I'm excited for tomorrow.
Didn't Eclipsium also provide a gift in a PowerShell script that can check to see if you've been had?
Glad you mentioned it. On our GitHub page, there is, because when I first saw this like real inside baseball, right? I first saw it. I'm like, we should just give this away. It says the evangelist of the company, right? Like, we should just give this away. And then they gave it away. So it's a PowerShell script that does two things. It tells you if you've got a Gigabyte motherboard, and then it tells you if your system is running this Gigabyte update service as a result. And that's a PowerShell script that you can run. It's completely free. You can go to our GitHub. I think it's github.com/Eclipsium, and you can go grab that.
Yeah. And, it feels like we keep opening the UFI Pandora box, or keep finding more ways that people are exploiting or doing other weird stuff. Is it because it's new and shiny, or is it because we just started paying attention, or something else?
No, I mean, we've known about a lot of these attacks vulnerabilities in UFI for a long time. I think some of it is in order to maintain persistence and stealth on the system, is how I like to position it, that attackers are looking for these methods, because it gives them somewhat of in their case, a luxury of being before the operating system in order to manipulate the operating system. Because once you're inside the operating system, things get kind of messy. There's EDR, there's other protections. Well, you can get around those by going earlier in the process, and also maintain that persistence, so that if the system's wiped or rebooted or whatever, you can constantly reinsert, which is now a downside for this Gigabyte thing, because you may say, well, that Windows service is bad, I'm going to kill it and delete it. Well, the next time you reboot, that binary in the firmware is just copying it back.
Is this just a dry run for your webinar tomorrow?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Can we move on?
Yeah.
Move on.
Sure.
Let's move on. Jason, pick a story.
I know you wanted to talk about the MoveIT.
Well,
Move it.
I
The
feel
MoveIT
like we
exploit.
can't
I'd like to
avoid
move it.
MoveIt. We've
No,
got
I
3
mean,
weeks of
What's the
MoveIt.
I mean, at the end of the day,
with
I mean, I used to like it, move it. Now I don't like
I
move
like
it,
to
move it.
move it. He likes to
Speaking
move
of
it, move
old
it.
school-
Old school hip hop. We're talking
Was that
about
a 90s song?
No, I mean it's a SQL injection, right? Vulnerability that gives access to the database, but not just the contents.
But which one are you
the
talking
structure.
about? They've had
What is
3
hold on, time out.
vulnerabilities published in the last
Time out.
3
I have
weeks.
a question. What is MoveIt?
Ooh, good question. What is
It's
MoveIt?
it's a SFTP service,
Okay,
secure file transfer service,
gotcha.
third-party application, and it's SQL injection vulnerability, and they
So
have
it's a vulnerability. This wasn't a supply chain attack, was it?
No.
No, it's just a straight up
it's Straight up
vulnerability.
vulnerability. And it gives access to the contents. Now, what I understand is that in June, Clop Leaks actually said that this is ours. We own this. And not only did they
Clop, like the ransomware group?
yes,
Clop?
Clop. Yep. And basically
Clop,
they're
those
saying
guys.
that they're going to start exploiting and extortion for anybody that they've hacked. So they came out and said this is ours. From a Clop.
So they said this. We found this vulnerability.
I would modify you're going to start to they're doing it.
Probably they're doing it. Yes.
Well, yeah, because it wouldn't make sense for them to go, hey, about that vulnerability, we're going to start exploiting it now, because
Exactly.
that would be, they probably are saying we already exploited it and we're just going to.
I mean, they basically claimed responsibility for this attack, and now they're going to start their extortion side of the aisle, right? Where they're going to start extorting companies that.
This is not the first time this secure file transfer thing has been. What was the appliance that people had that was a secure file transfer
what
thing?
was that thing called?
Yeah, what was that, Lee? Do you remember that? Good Lord,
I
my
was
brain
gonna
doesn't
go
work.
look it up because I'm thinking this was freaking familiar. And
Yes.
oh, by the way, you may never heard of the company. Was it Progress? But I bet we've all heard
Progress
of
is
the
the
former name. It was IP Switch.
Progress was
Remember IP
Progress is the
Switch
parent
and
company,
WSFTP?
Well,
Yeah.
oh yeah, IP Switch was
What's IP
WSFTP. Is that what you said? That rings a
Yeah,
bell.
that was them.
Ah.
Same company.
Maybe you can help me
Yeah, and-
remember that old school '90s hip hop group that I can't think of.
So I have a philosophical question
Yeah.
for our esteemed set of hosts here. I was looking up on the CVE database because they've literally had 3 major CVEs against MoveIT over the last, I think, 3
3
weeks.
weeks.
And they're all SQL injection. And I'm like, but wait, they're not the only SQL injections. For a product, let's say in the last 4 years, what's a reasonable number of SQL injection vulnerabilities to be discovered? Or when do you start going, they're not getting something?
I don't know. There's a reasonable number for me is 0.
0.
Okay.
Exactly at 0.
Or 1. Fool me once, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
I mean,
If
they've had, and I'm not picking on them, but just in the CVE database, going back, I think 4 years, they've had 11 CVEs published, and they're all SQL injection.
Yep.
So
Yeah, like after
process.
after the first.
Something's wrong at this company.
So
that they're not.
Here's how it happened. I'm in the Clop ransomware gang, and I wake up in my posh mansion in Russia somewhere, right? And I'm like,
Your dirt hut. Okay.
yeah, someone looked at that MoveIT stuff, and they've already got 5 SQL injections. And so I get on whatever kind of chat that I have with my evil criminal conspirators, and I'm like, hey, look, guys, I think we can find at least another 5 SQL injections in this software because they've had 5 in the past. They obviously don't know jack about SQL injection. Like, let's have at it, and then proceed to find more SQL injection vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
and leverage it.
But by that logic, we're not done yet.
And then I go feed my tiger.
No. So if do you remember what the ultimate recommendation on the Excellion FTA was? That was the previous guy. Basically, get rid of them, move on to another product. It's just too much has been had. But those were about past service life or something. But I'm thinking MoveIT is dead.
Why is there an application that
hold
does
on.
SFTP anyway?
It's just hold on. I want to table that question for a moment. I just want to go back and say that MoveIT is the current application. The company that makes it was called what now?
Progress.
Progress.
But before that, it was
before that it was Progress. I think it's.
But Lee, I thought you said before that it was Ipswich, and their product was WSFTP.
Yeah.
Jeff, do me a favor while you're in the CVE database. Look at how many CVEs are associated with WSFTP. I think it's significant.
Yeah.
We can do
like
that.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Because I'm getting back from feeding getting back from feeding my tiger, and I'm like, hold on. I remember this Ipswich company. That WSFTP was a train wreck with security. This is
goes
definitely
back
something.
to 2006 to 2008, and there's 7 of them.
Yeah, it was bad.
So to your point, why does it exist?
Right. So if
Jeff's
you have any IPs,
my philosophical question is, why do the SQL injection vulnerabilities keep showing up for this particular product? What would your advice be as a consultant or advisor to this company?
There has to. So let me back up a moment. The problem that we're trying to solve is, I own company A.
Yep.
You guys work for company B and C. We need to securely share files with each other. Yep. The way it used to happen is I'd be like, oh, I've got a public FTP server. Like, here's a username and password that I email to you in clear text, right? And so soon, an entire subsection of our industry emerged to go, we can provide, one, very important, an easy way for companies A, B, and C to work together and securely share files, right? You've seen this maybe with your accountant, maybe with your attorney, that they're like, hey, you need to upload this document all filled out with your social security number on it. You need to log into, we could rattle off a list of services that essentially allow for secure messaging and or secure file transfer. Mimecast has as an example, a service for that. Does DocuSign have that now? I think DocuSign has that now. There's like a whole mixture of companies that provide it. One of them is software called MoveIT. That's essentially probably putting like a fancy wrapper around an SFTP file transfer that makes it easy for Sally in accounting, and Dave in finance, and CEO of this company to share files together that don't have a deep, technical background.
The first search was just WSFTP. Then I did WS_FTP 39 CV.
Oh, there you go. That sounds more like it.
Is that better for you?
But with where we are today, why does that exist? We have things like OneDrive where we can securely share files.
I hate OneDrive.
There's lots of ways to skin this cat.
There is.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So
Well,
there's not really a good answer to Jason's question, but there is sort of an answer, and that is a lot of processes, particularly business processes, are based on something that looks like FTP or SFTP. In other words, a file transfer protocol, and where you can drop in the file server's appliance that basically you interact with using one of those two commands. And it's low impact. To go to a OneDrive or a Box or a Google Share, you got to rewrite the transfer module to do it right. And I think that's really what it is the effort to move to something that's different. And it's been working for a double-digit number of years. Why would you change it? I didn't say there's the right answer. I'm just saying that's what's behind it. It's the business impact of trying to change it.
It works.
The reality is
it's convenient. Why not?
Right.
I want to know, Aaron, how do you securely share files? He was falling asleep there. Look. He's like, oh shit, Paul's calling on me.
Well, it's like it's Thursday where he is.
It is.
He sends USB drives in the mail, right?
I use trivial FTP because I like its port number.
Yeah. That is the best answer ever.
Hey, I've got a novel idea. Why don't you encrypt the data before you send it, and then you can use TFTP?
Oh, but then we got to exchange PGP keys, and then I haven't been to a PGP key signing party in 20 years.
Yeah,
I have all that.
Yeah,
Don't worry, Paul. I'll put a file on the server next to my file with the keys in it.
You're right. I mean, if that's your public key, that's fine then. That's totally fine, right?
But
just rename your private key ring something else, like
private.
Don't look here. But to your point, Paul, there are more ways to skin the cat. But why are we fixated on SFTP or WSFTP? I assume that it was more costly 20 years ago to do file level encryption. Or PGP has just always been really hard to use.
Then you have a key management problem.
Issue.
Yeah.
Right. But there are more ways to skin the cat, and you wouldn't have to worry about all these issues.
all I can respond with is excuses that amount to inertia and/or too big to change. But I didn't say you were wrong. I think
I'm
maybe
rarely
we haven't
wrong.
reached the tipping point where enough players are unwilling to take the risks on these old models of file transfers that they're going to get the culture to change. We're getting close.
What I also find bothersome, and I've this has come up a couple times.
Get it off your chest, Jeff.
In the last couple weeks for various different topics, but the reason why this is popular is because it's convenient.
Correct. Yes.
Has nothing to do with security.
Correct.
Irritates the crap out of me.
Yeah. No, they want an enterprise solution.
We're not in the convenience business. We're in the security business.
But OneDrive is interesting because, while likely it's an effective solution, I don't know. I haven't used OneDrive for secure file transfer. Right?
Hate OneDrive.
Side note, there is a lot of reasons to hate OneDrive. However, it requires that OneDrive be configured properly.
Absolutely, 100%.
And now, if I were to come to your organization, Envision, you could probably help me with that.
Absolutely.
There's your free plug, right?
100%.
But not everyone has that luxury of going, oh, we either know how to securely configure and manage OneDrive, or we know someone that can help us with that. A lot of people aren't on that path. They're not. Maybe they're on Google. Sure. Maybe they're on different platforms, or they don't want to pay the licensing, like whatever it is. Or I've got 300,000 users, and that could be costly, or whatever.
Right,
there's a million reasons why.
So, serious question: what makes OneDrive more secure?
Well, I didn't say it was more secure. I said it was an option.
It is an option.
It is an option. Yeah.
And why are you okay? Is it a more secure option?
It's a readily available option.
So it's a more convenient.
Where configured
it's an
correctly
alternatively
for the
convenient option.
Not convenient is that convenient in a sense that you may have if you're.
I mean, it's practically ubiquitous. I can't turn it off.
Right. If you're part of an organization, you're using O365.
You already have the licensing.
You got it. You
It's
got it.
there, and you can't.
But someone
I'm
has to
forever
configure
losing
it.
files because I try to turn OneDrive
someone-
off,
but I
and I
think-
try to store stuff locally because I'm
Yeah,
old. I
school,
don't like
yeah.
putting stuff
You're
in the
old school,
cloud.
right?
And yet, where's that file go?
You still pay your bills by mailing someone a check. You get it.
I let my wife pay the bills. I don't know how she does it, but that's
But I
another
think
story.
even in, like, so OneDrive as an example, by default, it doesn't allow you to share or receive files externally.
That's right.
So someone
You
has
have
to
to
go in and enable
configure
it
it.
and make
All right,
sure
so,
you configure it.
So that's not
properly.
an option then, because we're talking about companies sharing. So how do you share with OneDrive across companies? You have to allow access.
Yes.
External access.
Well, the first thing is you have to allow access, and then there has to be some. You have to grant someone else access to be able to
You
put
have to bring
files
them in as a
in.
guest.
And
Is
what?
that-
and,
I don't know
and what's
exactly
the
how it- yeah, yeah.
underlying
Yep.
secure transmission protocol that OneDrive uses?
Now you're asking
yeah,
technical questions about
Or,
Windows stuff.
or is it just SSL? Is it just TLS? Because it's all
I
web
see.
based.
Deeper in that.
I did.
You guys are
Calling
disappointing me.
calling Tyler Robinson,
That's
calling
right, that's
Sean
right, that's
Metcalf. How does that work? Those are the two people who
Oh,
come to mind that I would ask to get the answer to that question. So I will get you your answer by asking the appropriate people.
All right.
Anyway,
And
Well,
now we're moving on.
I should know the answer to.
Yeah.
We're moving on.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Move it. Move it. Let's move it along.
Move it.
Well, talk about. Let's
I
go
had
back
one
to.
I
Let's.
wanted
Khalid.
Yeah. So I actually had one that made me think of you, Paul, and actually two, but the one I wanted to go for was there's this now Windows 11 Win32 app isolation, which sounds like containers for all the things you're running on the desktop. And it was like, and with a virtualized registry and virtualized file system, I thought, tell me you're already playing with this, because this feels like something you'd be messing with. And is this a good idea?
I'm
Or if you
not.
even looked at it.
I am a fan of virtualized applications. I think it's been difficult to be able to allow organizations to do that at scale. Like Bromium comes to mind. Great technology. Difficult from what I've heard to deploy at scale. And I think the isolation of applications is something that everyone's trying to get to. I mean, we've been seeing the Linux side with Snap, right? In the application isolation and protections. If I could run every application inside of a container and there were, I'll call them lines in the sand, that protected those applications from each other, that would be great. That's what I think Bromium actually achieved for applications on systems, and I thought it did a great job. But managing all of that at scale is a complete and utter nightmare from what I've heard. And I can see that too. I see it with, Snap is very different from the technology you're talking about, Lee, but I see it with Snap. If I install an application on Linux in Snap, and oftentimes there's an issue where it won't run, the plugin won't load, something won't load, module won't load because of the isolation that gets created for that application within Snap. So there's challenges there.
See, I was wondering, I mean, I love the idea that they're isolated, right? So if one gets buggered up, the others are much harder, and, moving horizontally, injecting a DLL would become way difficult. But I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, we've got this stuff is so interdependent and so, so much inter-process going on. I'm wondering if it totally have to re-engineer the apps in order for them to actually work with that isolation.
Yeah,
I didn't even think about how hard it would be to manage.
Yeah, and I think that also
It'd be very inconvenient.
I think we try to look at these virtualization isolation technologies as that silver bullet, and what I think we fail to realize oftentimes, I get excited about them, right? We all get excited about some of these
No,
technologies.
just you.
Some people, a certain percentage of the population gets excited about this for a security use case, but then I think we realize that there's a stack that
Mostly
it trickles.
Armenian, but go ahead.
True. There's a stack, right, that trickles down to that the controlling mechanisms all have flaws, because all software has flaws. So as we go from application through kernel space into virtualization or Hyper-V, back down into the firmware level, like there's always a way that I've seen anyway. Someone always finds a way to persist through those layers to gain essentially more privilege to circumvent the controls at a higher level. And I think these virtualization and container technologies have largely all fallen victim to that. The rings, if you will, like rings of the operating system. So,
I mean, one of the things that made me think about, many among others, was the fact that they said this is for applications that run at a low privilege level, and we've talked about, don't turn on privilege in a container.
Right.
And I was thinking, with the comparison to the Bromium, is Microsoft big enough to actually pull this off as opposed to a partial effort? And they kind of own the OS. They'd probably start with the Office suite. I just don't know how far it'll go before somebody will say, "Oops."
It's funny.
Not
It's
so
funny you
much.
mentioned that. There is a guest that I have on my list that you guys know about. So for our audience, I maintain a list of. It's kind of like a hit list, right? And I'm not looking to get these people killed. I'm looking to have them on the show, right? And one of those guests, I had this conversation with, and he works at Microsoft, and we will reach out again. And we were talking about this particular topic, how to create like these tight containers on Windows, and they do have some technology for that. I am not an expert on this technology. This person is who works at Microsoft. So I think it's a good conversation to have, Lee.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Oh, let's talk Fortinet for a moment. Jason, I know you and I chatted very briefly before the show about Fortinet and their vulnerabilities.
Slew of vulnerabilities.
Now, I don't want to pick on Fortinet.
No,
I'm
it
not
happens, it
shaming.
happens.
Everyone has vulnerabilities. Barracuda has vulnerabilities, and we'll talk about those next. I think it's a nice segue. Very somewhat similar.
All these infrastructure
kind of
vendors
things.
go
Yeah.
through their Cisco at one point, slew of vulnerabilities, right? They go through these cycles.
Put it this way, we all live in glass houses, man. Like,
Totally.
so, all right,
100%.
Fortinet, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that have happened recently, and there are CVEs tied to those vulnerabilities. Fortinet, I think, has done a good job of being transparent.
They absolutely have.
Assigning CVEs to them,
Yep.
getting them fixed, sending
Open in
out
their
advisories.
communications.
Yeah, and sending
Very open
advisories
in
to
their
customers.
communications.
Yeah.
Holy crap. CVE search Fortinet, 317 records.
Well, yeah,
Over
because they
time.
have a ton.
Over time.
Over time, they have a ton of products.
They have
Yeah,
a ton of gear, right?
they've
But you're
acquired
absolutely right.
companies too.
And the good part about Fortinet is that they are very open with their partners and with their clients, their end product clients. So the communication's been outstanding. Now, have they been hit with a slew of vulnerabilities lately? Absolutely. But they're handling it the right way.
Yeah, but it's somewhat dizzying for me working in this space, trying to track which CVE was associated with which ransomware group, which one's being attacked in the wild, which one is affected by which product. I think it was the SSL VPN
SSL
product.
VPN, yep.
That's the big one.
It is.
If you got a Fortinet SSL VPN product, is it called a FortiGate SSL VPN? Is that the right name for it?
FortiGate, yeah.
It's a FortiGate.
FortiGate.
You definitely want to start applying some patches and paying attention
And that's
to
the
that.
key. It's patch. And they've been releasing patches fast.
Yes.
Fast.
Like we're at Eclipse, and
And
I'm trying to
maybe
keep
better
up.
than
Like
that.
we actually have detections for a lot of these. What a lot of people know is we actually do support networking gear like Fortinet, and so we have detections for a lot of this stuff. And I'm trying to map it to like, hey, we have this detection, and it covers this CVE, and it was used by what was the Vault Typhoon? Vault Typhoon, the Typhoon one.
Yeah.
Vault Typhoon. I think was that
Volt Typhoon.
Volt Typhoon. Thank you.
Volt.
And so I don't know. I don't have all the there needs to be like a mapping, a matrix table or something that kind of shows like this CVE, patch this one first because it's actively exploited by this group, patch this one. And again, it's not Fortinet's fault. Like they're doing the best they can with communication. But a lot has happened recently with them, so it's been hard to navigate.
Side note or tangent, one of their recent vulnerabilities involved an infinite loop, unreachable exit condition. When's the last time you encountered an infinite loop?
When I learned to program in BASIC, no, definitely
C.
Holy DOS, running out of resources, Batman.
every time I've written a program since then, when I first started in BASIC, and every time after that, basically. Wow.
So one of the things Jason didn't mention is that Fortinet said even if you don't have the vulnerable service enabled, apply the patch because there's vulnerable code here.
Yes,
I thought
like
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll stand behind
And,
that. I like
no
that
doubt about it.
recommendation too.
But one difference I have, I agree with Paul's risk-based approach to figure out whether we should patch, which is really what you were doing. But when it comes to remote access boundary control devices, they're at the top of my list, and keep them updated now, just because they're your perimeter. I mean, we could talk about zero trust or not, but for most of us, we still have a hard perimeter, and you really need to keep it updated.
Patch immediately.
Or am I being too extreme?
No, I think Extreme is, well, it was another networking company, ironically enough. Did they got bought, right? They got bought a while. Extreme Networks? Or do they still? No, did they not get bought?
No, they didn't. No, I don't think so.
Are they still?
Extreme's still on their own.
Wow.
I believe so.
Oh, the best colors on any network gear I've ever seen in my life. They're beautiful. Beautiful.
Aesthetically pleasing.
Aesthetically. Purple, right? It was like purple. It was awesome.
Yes.
Sorry, that was a tangent. Oh, I wanted to talk about Barracuda.
Wait, before we move on.
Wait,
Stupid.
before we go to Barracuda.
Well, just more stupid stuff I'm looking at on the CVE database.
What's your favorite color scheme?
SQL injection for the 317 CVEs from Fortinet. Only 6 of them.
Yeah.
And the last one was in 2022. So what I'm hearing is with Fortinet is they acknowledge, it's software. It has problems.
Yep.
When we discover them, we'll let you know. We'll supply the patch, install it, we'll move on. That's kind of the way it's supposed to be.
Correct.
It's not necessarily ideal, but that's the world we live in.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Okay, go ahead. Move on, Paul.
So Barracuda. Really interesting. So attackers getting into Barracuda gear.
Barracuda.
Persisted in, there was basically groups that were very well documented. Rapid7 documented some of it. Barracuda came out and said basically attackers are getting into our stuff through a series of vulnerabilities persisting inside of them. And I think the most interesting part for me is they said we need to replace your gear. If you have certain types, models of Barracuda gear, they're like, you need to replace it with new gear. Now I have a couple of theories on that. And one of them I can back up with evidence. My first theory is similar to how you would like wipe or replace a workstation because malware was so embedded inside of that Windows system that you're like, I either got to
re-image the drive, start from scratch,
or I got to replace it, right? Blow it away and start over. So in Barracuda's case, maybe they were so intertwined in the inner workings of largely what I think is Linux-based firmware on these devices, or Linux-based operating system on these devices, that they're like, we need to replace it. Now, the other scenario is they got below the attackers got below the operating system and persisted inside of firmware. Was just I have absolutely no evidence to support that. I have circumstantial evidence, I should qualify that, to support that. Because if you go on eBay and you look for used Barracuda appliances, some of those eBay listings, like the one I linked to in the show notes, will link to a Barracuda email gateway appliance. Where is it? I want to give the model number of it. Which story am I on right here? Hold on. Barracuda, eBay
5.
link right here. This is an email
5.
security gateway 400. It's a rack-mounted industrial-looking device. If you look under the covers on that eBay listing, oh, look, there's a picture of the internal board. Guess which OEM is on that internal board? That would be MSI. Most of us can look at that picture and go, oh, that's an MSI motherboard. And go, what happened recently with MSI? Oh, right. They were breached and leaked 1.5 terabytes of information, including pretty much every private key that they had in that entire system. So if I'm an attacker and I land on a Barracuda appliance and there's an MSI board in it, if I'm a savvy attacker, I already have the private keys for that system, which means I can create my own firmware that is signed to be on that system and I can persist. Therefore, Barracuda says you need to replace your device. Now, again, purely speculation, purely circumstantial evidence. This eBay listing could be photoshopped for as far as I know, right? Like, I don't believe anything I read on the internet, which is in one of our other stories too, by the way. But there it is. That's the evidence that I have. And I'm not saying it's Barracuda's fault. Look, if I'm working at Barracuda and I'm like, you know what? we're going to sell hundreds of thousands of these devices. And these MSI boards, they're $50 cheaper than the next model up from a non-MSI. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Let's go with the MSI. And look, MSI makes great hardware. Their firmware security practices, however, are not up to par in my professional opinion. And I spend more time than most looking at that, right? And certainly at Eclipsium, we spend way more time than most looking at that. I mean, that's what we do. But, I mean, there's the facts, right? I mean, also MSI does not sign a lot of their firmware updates. And we know that because they leaked 1.5 terabytes worth of stuff.
Barracuda CVE database, 40 CVEs over the last 20 years. Only 2 SQL injections. I'm having fun on the CVE database.
Right.
Yeah, you are.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, you are.
So
Good stuff.
whether your Barracuda email gateway is physical, virtual, whether it's been hacked or not, they want you to replace it. I mean, Barracuda is putting their money where their mouth is. I realize providing a VM isn't a big cost.
Is it a free replacement, a free upgrade?
That's what I was going to ask.
Are they going to have?
What's the incentive?
You need to replace it.
What's the
and
incentive?
it
The
only
answer is
costs
you
you
have to pay for it all.
$49.95.
The answer is it depends, right? It depends on what level of
Look, we're doing
support
the next
contract. I mean,
15
Jason
minutes,
knows,
you get
right?
8 gigs
Your
of
level
time.
of support
That's it.
contract, how long you have left on
100%.
support,
Yeah.
what you're upgrading to. This model is a free upgrade. This model is going to cost you $29.99 or
Was it
whatever.
a warranty thing? I mean, do we talk warranties when we talk
I mean, I'm sure
appliances?
warranty
I mean,
is probably a service contract.
The question
and that,
is, is it end of life?
right.
Is
If
it
it's
end of life or not?
Right.
Right. That's a huge question. If it's end of life and you've been
You would have to
sitting
buy
on
a new
it,
one anyway.
It's not
You're
end of
sitting-
life. It's end of support.
it's end of support.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's end of life or end of support, really, I mean, you'd have to buy a new one
You would-
anyway,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but there's also
End of support is what triggers actions, at least in the the PCI world that I live in.
Right.
End of life, yeah, whatever. As long as we're getting patches and updates.
Yeah.
End of support.
End of support
that's a
means no
problem.
more patch.
Yep.
Got to buy something new.
Yeah. And really think about this. If you've got, you got these issues in devices and you're trying to get people, you're getting your customers to upgrade, and then you're saying assume compromise. So now you got to get them to purge them of any malveillance before they, get them redeployed. And if they don't do it right, your phone's ringing off the hook. Well, you just give them a new one and avoid that whole cycle.
Yeah.
It might just be a least, what is it? Best bad answer scenario?
Right.
I don't know. Least wrong answer? Is that the term I'm
The
looking
least
for?
wrong
the least wrong answer. Yeah. I want to move on to IoT devices.
All
What
right.
happened with Asus, Lee? You had a story about Asus.
Oh, I had a story about Asus and Western Digital. Both of these were a firmware, update your firmware, your stuff's vulnerable scenario. Basically, Asus is like, put new firmware in, and if you can't update your firmware, turn off your internet accessible services. I'm thinking, shit, turn off those services. Irrespective, and update the dang thing, unless it's out of support. But Western Digital took it to the next level. They said, if here's these updates, and if you haven't applied them by June 15th, you can no longer access our cloud-based services that these work with, because we don't want you transferring anything nasty to our other customers. Which is actually kind of cool.
A line in the sand. They put a line in the sand,
30
yeah.
days. But yeah, that was kind of, I was thinking of our Hacks of the Matrix friend with those two, and of course a little bit of you too, Paul, because you do that stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah, these.
it's interesting. I think that making sure that it's secure before it leaves to go to the end consumer is where we want to be. But there's always going to be vulnerabilities and misconfiguration, security related items that crop up after that. And
Or SQL injection.
now, or SQL injections
Again, and again,
class
and
of
again.
again and again.
So there is no such thing as secure.
No, correct. And that now, but once the product ships, if the incentive is the user suffer some kind of pain point until they upgrade, I don't know that I like those incentive models for end consumer devices, right?
If only there was regulatory compliance programs.
Yeah, and that's hard for these IoT-based kind of systems where, again, incentives are... I was talking about this. I was a guest on the Shared Security show. Like, incentives are weird when it comes to consumer-based IoT. And it's all based on cost. The manufacturers want the lowest cost to produce it so that they can bring it to market at the lowest cost. So when the consumer goes to buy it, they're looking for the lowest cost. They're looking for that. I'm going on Amazon, and I want the lowest cost Asus router
or if they're
Western
security
Digital.
savvy, they're looking for bang for the buck. What's the most security I can get for the least cost?
See, I think it's a relatively small percentage of the population where security weighs in on the
At all.
on the purchasing
Agreed.
decision for these
Agreed.
devices.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that line in the sand is a legal liability risk question. If they don't put a line in the sand, that extends their legal liability.
Right. Which is where, to Jeff's point, regulation can help. If the FTC came down and said, hey, we're going to fine you millions of dollars because you didn't fix these security vulnerabilities and you left consumers at risk.
Yep.
That has been a stick in the past. They haven't done that in a long time though.
Well, Paul, when I was a kid, my horse-drawn buggy did not have seatbelts at all.
They didn't have seatbelt. They didn't have like a rope or something.
Nothing.
Like even like a lap.
Not even
Like a leather strap that you put in. No. And then at some point, the vehicles started coming with seatbelts. And then at some point, it became a law you had to wear the seatbelt. And even then, there was a grace period. Well, you couldn't get pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt, but at some point, if you did get pulled over and you happened to not be wearing a seatbelt, you could get fined for it. So, which speaks to the regulatory and the motivation. How do you get people to do stuff, which is process related? But the reason why seatbelts came to be a thing in automobiles is because there was enough issues, there was enough pressure, there was enough regulatory requirements that it became a thing. And that somehow needs to extend into our discussions.
And only when you got fines did adoption happen.
Right.
So there had to be some type of repercussion.
Well, I think
it's that pain point you were talking about.
But I think it was D-Link and Netgear that got fined by the FTC. And like magically, sometime after that, they had bug bounty programs. Like go figure. So, I mean, that's a case where regulation led to change in a positive direction.
It's the stick and the carrot. You don't want to get whacked by the stick.
Right. Oh, we have lots more examples of IoT devices. Good Lord. This was like the week of...
a tangential IoT-related article, if I could interject.
Yeah, go for it.
Where?
I mean, it's IoT-related, but my article for Enphase ignores a CISA request to fix remotely exploitable flaws. So Enphase produces some sort of IoT device. I forget what.
You say they ignored the request?
Yeah, I mean, CISA put out advisories saying here's some serious vulnerabilities. There's a CVE, and Enphase has been, this company called Enphase Systems has been unresponsive. Which, you know, when I'm reading the article, I'm thinking, well, is CISA following the sort of the CISA?
It's CISA.
CISA.
No, it's CISA.
Whatever.
No, it's CISA.
CISA. CISO? CISO?
People from CISA tell me it's CISA.
Whatever.
It is
CISA.
No, it's CISA.
Are they following the same sort of you know, I don't know where it's written down what the rules are for vulnerability to disclosure and publication, but you know, it's generally understood. You contact the vendor, you give them a fair chance to, you know, figure out what the fix is, and you don't announce it until there's a patch. I don't know if CISA went through that process or not. I don't know if CISA has to go through that process or not. What I thought was interesting about this article is the fact they just went ahead and published, you know, here's the vulnerabilities against this thing, and they're kind of holding out Enphase and saying, hey, here it is, do something about it, and Enphase has been unresponsive. Thoughts?
Well, what is CIS's authority? Is the authority over every public and private organization, or is CIS's authority just for if you do business with the federal government?
That's a great question.
Right?
I don't know.
Where does the authority lie? Because they could sit back and say we do no business with the federal government, so whatever. Where's the carrot?
Yeah. Well, CISA wants to work with everybody, but their primary mission is with public sector.
Exactly.
So you're absolutely right. They could say, well, CISA, you don't matter.
Exactly.
But to be honest, in 2023, you really got to be receptive to vulnerability disclosure and respond. Or,
I agree. I agree 100%. I'm just trying to think about the mindset that they had when they made that decision.
Yeah.
Right? And they may sit back and say, what's the risk of CISA putting out this authority? And they can sit back, they can say, you want to know what? To us, we're not doing business with the federal government. So
yeah,
and it's negligent. I think it's negligent.
I agree, but also I think it's interesting to think about what authority CISA has versus the FTC, the FDA, and other bodies, right? Maybe if you're in critical infrastructure or selling in critical infrastructure, CISA has more authority. I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
It is a great question.
I think we should ask Jen Esterly. Is she the director? Easterly? Isn't she the director of CISA currently?
She's got some high level position.
Yeah, what is her title?
Is.
She's the director.
Yeah, she's director of CISA.
Have we interviewed her?
She's on the hit list.
On the hit list.
There's a big difference between influence and authority, right? CISA has a lot of influence.
Yes.
But where does their authority lie?
I feel like they can make a lot of recommendations. It's left to other branches and government entities to be the stick.
Well, so Lee had an article that talks about CISA and NSA, I think, putting out some sort of advisory. But the private sector seems to look to NIST if they're doing anything relatively...
Well, I don't think NIST is the enforcement. NIST creates the standards.
NIST is not the enforcement.
It's the standards.
Right, creates the standards.
Yeah, but... yes, they create the standard, but even then, it was originally focused on public sector. But somehow the private sector has embraced NIST.
Well, NIST formally came out and said the framework not only, is for the public sector. Now we want to expand the framework to the private sector. So they did that years ago.
But I feel like CISA and NIST both can say you should do this.
Sure.
Whereas the FDA can say you must do this, or you're not going to get approval for your medical device,
or you're going to get fined.
And the FTC can say fine.
Yeah. CISA has no authority to fine.
That's what Cool Hand Luke calls negative reinforcement.
Yeah, there you go. But the other thing about CISA though is because any company in the U.S., public or private, can call them up for service. If you give them the middle finger, I don't know that they'll be as responsive if you have an issue and you call for help.
Oh yeah. Be careful what you wish for.
And by the way, their help is free. We already paid collectively.
But you get what you pay for?
I don't know if I go there. I mean, there's some. I know people that are not fond of stuff CISA says and does, but folks I've dealt with at CISA actually they know their stuff. So I guess.
But I also think that it's interesting, Aaron. Your story number 4 is an interesting segue from this, right? Because CISA may say, NIST may say, you must, as a government agency, run up-to-date software, patch within a certain window, yet I don't think they disclosed which federal agency this was, but they were running, in some cases, a 6-year-old version of Microsoft IIS.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous when we have so many organizations that are sort of throwing things over the fence and saying, let's update this, update that, and we need to be on top of our game. And then certain organizations obviously aren't getting audited in any way, shape, or form and have vulnerabilities dating back to 2019 and even further back in time.
How does that happen?
Well,
I mean, I understand how it happens.
it happens
but-
because there is a lack of regulatory compliance for a lot of organizations and industry in our country and the world.
if they only add PCI.
If they only did PCI.
Are we still drinking? We're still drinking on
We're
PCI.
still drinking on
okay.
PCI.
Yep.
I need a refill now.
Yep.
Well, whatever you want to say about PCI was simple enough to say, look, if you want to do business and engage in commerce and use credit cards, you have to follow these rules.
And if you don't, what is the outcome?
The outcome is
Depends on which level merchant you are.
you don't get to use our credit cards. And that's a very strong incentive.
Yep.
Is
Right.
that a negative reinforcement or is that a positive reinforcement? You can do what you want. You just don't get to accept a Visa card or a MasterCard. And
The incentive is impact to your business.
we don't talk enough about incentives, perhaps, in our industry. And it's funny because over the last couple of years, in the hacker security community, all the conferences I go to, when certain bad things happened in the last couple of years, and my mind's a blur.
A lot of bad things have happened.
There's been a series of events that happen where, like, oh my gosh, and all the hackers that I hang out with at all these different conferences, they're like, oh, we hate government, we hate intervention, we hate regulation, we hate compliance. Yeah, but the only way to solve this is regulatory compliance. And I chuckle a little bit when I hear the people that have been like, we don't want any government intervention. Say, yeah, but that's the only way to really fix it.
But like we said earlier, there's overreach when it comes to legislation, and then there's, baseline have-to-haves at the end of the day. And there needs to be some level of motivation for organizations to invest, to put some skin in the game.
Right.
Has to be. If there's no motivation, we're just going to keep flying the way we're flying.
I think there's a lot of problems in security that are really difficult to solve.
Say easy, do hard.
Like legacy stuff and certain
Technical
situations.
debt is hard.
Microsoft has a bitch of a time with revocation lists and a lot of different aspects. And while I want to be like, WTF, Microsoft, at the same time, I'm kind of like, well, that's a problem at scale that is not easily solved. But I want to go to IoT devices and go, what if the requirement said you should have a secure firmware update process, and you should have a secure way to manage the device, and you can't hard code passwords in firmware. I feel like we wouldn't be creating huge barriers to entry if we put those requirements on a lot of
Change the should
IoT.
to a shall.
Yeah. Like,
Well, yeah. I mean,
shall.
the problem
shall
is
do
the
that.
problem is the should
Right.
is translated in our
Into
world
I don't have to.
optional. Yeah.
Yes.
right.
Oh, so I don't
it.
have to do anything.
That's what I'm saying.
Tell me
Change
what I
the
have to
should
do.
to a shall.
Should is not something I
You
have
must.
to do.
You will.
Or
Must will.
or required.
You are required to do this.
word.
And I don't believe, my experience with firmware, that creates huge barriers to entry. And I think that a lot of companies are getting away with shenanigans because they're just trying to do it as cheaply as possible. License this software.
I don't have to do it,
reuse
so I
this
won't.
software. Like whatever. I don't have to do
But they're
that.
not getting away with anything. That's just simple good economics, and that's a good business strategy. Why do anything that we don't have to do?
Well, what it leads to is
if we're a public company, we're responsible to our shareholders. We're trying to maximize our revenues and our profits, so we shouldn't do anything we don't have to do.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
But in my stories, it could lead to harm to pets. It could lead to people breaking into your home
If you don't
because your
pass
security,
me the maker's mark,
Yeah,
it could
yeah,
lead
yeah,
to
yeah.
Security
physical harm to
system-
you.
the
Paul.
automated pet feeder, right?
the automated pet feeder. I think I
saw
even
that
had
article,
another
oh my God, so
example
funny.
there.
And
Let's
you
just
should give me a few
They
cubes.
can pivot into
I'm
your home
gonna-
network.
Yes, I'm gonna hold on. I gotta take care of
The
Jeff.
funny part is that the
got
article
some-
actually said it could cause harm to your pets by overfeeding them.
Which is a thing.
Oh, come on.
Well, potentially
I
a thing.
died. That was funny. I get the pivoting into your home network, The overfeeding your pets, that's a whole other thing for me. Nah,
Dude, look.
Come on now.
No one wants to be responsible for harming a pet, all right?
If I get a chubby pet, it's okay.
I'm going to give you an example.
Fifi is fat.
I'm watching the Netflix documentary, New York versus the Mafia.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, being from Rhode Island,
Mm-hmm.
it has something to do with
The mafia.
this fascination with the mob. Like,
Yeah, 'cause
I'm a mob nerd.
We're like
right?
epicenter of mafia activity.
Yeah. Well,
Come on
maybe
now.
not epicenter. I'd say New York is the epicenter. We're a tangential.
New York was under the radar for decades, and guess what? We were the clandestine mafia location here. So, come on. A lot came out of here, my friend.
Yeah, I'll give it. I think we hit it better than New York, perhaps.
Because we could.
Well, I think people also think that like Rhode Island is Long Island, so they just thought we were in New York. That's really what happens. In any case, I'm watching this documentary, and so the backstory is Paul and Jason, especially being from Rhode Island, we watched a ton of stuff around. You probably grew up watching The Godfather. Did you watch The Godfather?
long.
Yeah,
All
like
day
every
long.
Thanksgiving.
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
And then Goodfellas.
Watch The Godfather.
And Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. The Sopranos. The whole thing. And all the documentaries, read the books, the whole thing, right? Mob nerds. So there's this new documentary on Netflix, and I'm like, why can this documentary tell me that I haven't already watched about the mob? Like, I've watched a million documentaries on the mob. Well, turns out they go like behind the scenes of the FBI agents that were infiltrating the mafia at its height in crime, and like Gambino, where the five families were still prominent in New York. So you got Gambinos, Genovese, help me out, Jason. Gambinos.
Those are the two big
Genovese.
ones.
Those are
Millers,
the
Smiths.
the two big ones. No.
Did they actually cover Patriarca?
O'Reilly.
No. They didn't get into it
Wow.
out. But so they were going, they found one of the families, one of their meeting places for some of the captains was at a restaurant, and they wanted to go put a bug in
Was
the
a restaurant in Federal Hill?
No, it was not in Federal. This was in New York or New Jersey, right? This was New York centric.
Yeah.
Jason.
Bonanno, Colombo,
Bonanno,
Gambino,
Colombo, and Gambino.
Genovese,
Yes,
and
yes.
Lucchesi.
Colombo.
Yes.
That's the big
Google.
one.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. So they go into this restaurant and they observe what table they sit at, and they're like, that light fixture above the table, that's where we want to put a bug. So they wait till the restaurant closes. But lo and behold, this restaurant has a dog, a bull mastiff, that protects this restaurant and sleeps there overnight. So the FBI agents,
Put a collar.
they show them what's interesting, like hacker culture crossover, picking the lock. So there was someone assigned to breach and door entry.
Yep.
And again, this is happening like in the 70s. They're like, well, you can't just like kick the door in because people will know we're here. Like, we're planning a friggin' covert bug to spy on the mob, for crying out loud. Covert entry picks the lock. Door opens. Dog goes nuts. And so they have a syringe ready. And the FBI agents at the time, and I give them a lot of credit, like their lives were in danger. They literally got death threats at the time. Like, they literally were listening to, when they successfully planted bugs, they were like listening to the mob people knew who they were and were like, should we put a hit on
We're
this
going to go
person?
after their family.
Like, one of the Paul Castellano was like, nah, bring too much heat. And like the guy listening was like, that was my life that literally was just on the line right there. And Castellano like literally didn't. So they're like, we don't want to hurt the dog. I'm like props for you to like, I was like, it was like a moment. I'm like, yeah, we want to bring down these people who've killed hundreds of people and done horrible things, but like we don't want to hurt the dog. So they have the syringe, and like the dog's kind of older, and if I give him this injection to put him to sleep, they're afraid they're going to kill the dog. So he sticks his foot in the door, and the dog catches onto his foot and starts tugging on it, and the other FBI agent comes with a fire extinguisher and sprays the dog, and it goes and runs off. They run in, plant the bug, and come out. But they, for the whole thing, they're like, we didn't want, we weren't going to hurt the dog.
But that's a lot different than overfeeding your dog over time.
Where was they going with that
The
story?
article about overfeeding your dog.
Overfeeding the dog.
IoT.
Where were you
If
going?
there's a chance that I could harm your animal, I'm not going to harm your animal,
But I'm
even
gonna-
by
but I'm gonna
overfeeding.
start seeing that my dog is getting chubby, and I'm going to do something about it, bro. Come on.
Maybe. Maybe. Can you hurt a dog by how much can you hurt?
By overfeeding it?
There's science, all right. Someone's done a study. Multiple studies, and a study that's cross-referenced all the studies about how much harm you could do to a dog by overfeeding it.
Well,
we
there are dogs and fish out there that will eat themselves to death. There are even humans that overhydrate themselves to death. It's not that
This is
common.
true. See, Mandy's backing me
Takes
up.
a lot of
That's
time.
actual
Takes
science.
a lot of time. to do
Mandy's
that,
not a
though.
pirate anymore. It's crazy. Freaks me out.
Where was it? What were we
wasn't
talking
having-
We were
about?
talking about the IoT dog
the
feeder.
IoT dog feeder.
Where overfeeding the dog is less of a risk than them pivoting into your home network.
Yes.
Major
spying on
corporations
you.
are being breached, but your dog
It's
might
getting
be
chubby,
fed too much
getting
food.
chubby.
This is my top priority. I have a lot of dogs
What
at
the hell
home,
is
and
my dog feeder doing with a telnet listener?
I know.
The bigger issue is what Lee is pointing out is your pet feeder has a telnet listener on it and doesn't validate firmware updates, nor does it encrypt a video stream. And in clear text sends the ID and the password used for the video stream.
Hard-coded password. If I
Hard-coded.
remember the
As
article
long as
correctly,
it's not
hard-coded
posting
password.
video to
Am I the only
TikTok,
one
we're
that
good.
gets a new appliance and doesn't connect it to my home Wi-Fi?
I don't. Do
There are
I
some.
don't, I don't connect shit to my
No,
home.
because I didn't. There are ones that I have not connected.
Some I do, some I don't. My stove, I have not. I was like, no.
Don't you want to know if it's hot or not?
Yeah.
I'll put my hand over.
No,
it.
but you might burn yourself.
No,
or
I didn't say-
worse,
I didn't say
the
touch it.
dog might
I didn't
burn
say touch
itself.
it. I didn't say touch
More
it.
of a concern for me.
More of a concern.
There
the
are these,
dog
there are
might
these
burn-
visual
Dog is
indicators when they turn
starving
red.
because the device, right, has to make their own meals. Then
The dog
gets
might
burned.
hop up and like try to lick some of the overspill and burn its tongue.
Oh, then
That's a problem.
It won't do it again after the first time.
You'd think.
We hope.
Mandy,
think.
pick a story. You've been quiet for a while. Pick a story. Pick a
Well,
story.
one with the appliances did. Yes, I am having many technical difficulties over here. That said, did you at all talk about the story on where they were saying to replace? Was it the refrigerators?
Which story is that?
No.
Is it on there? I'm sorry, my tabs keep just shutting down, so I can't see the story list right now.
Let's see. Let's do a search.
What was my other? I had the pet feeders, and what was the other one?
Oh, you got a bunch, dude.
Okay.
As you look for that, we could think about your refrigerator and the one with the screen on it and the dog there. And if we find it through Shodan and then project ourselves onto the screen, we could actually train the dog to do funny things while the owners are at work.
That could be a legitimate concern.
Or it could be lots
Is that a vulnerability or a threat?
or a weakness.
Both.
Promise.
A weakness is the definition of vulnerability. Unless you
As
can
you
tell
told
me
me in
differently.
Slack earlier.
I
thank
did
you.
tell you in Slack.
Also, but your spy cameras can be hacked. So you can spy on the spies that are spying on you. Turns out these little spy cameras that you buy on Amazon that maybe you want to use to monitor your dog or spy on your children that have boyfriends or girlfriends coming over. Whatever your use case is.
Wait,
These
your
are
kids
tiny-
old enough for that?
Tiny little devices, Lee. There's pictures of them in this research paper that I thought was really good. But it turns out these are just like little like chips. They're not microcontrollers. Like they run a version of Linux on them. I would call them an embedded device or IoT device at that point. So not just a microcontroller. And they have pretty heinous vulnerabilities. Like the pet feeder, like the refrigerator, like all of these things that we're talking about.
So since we're sort of in a lull, my story number 8, a company called Orca Security put out a report based on some work that they did where they set up a bunch of honeypots on various platforms like GitHub and various cloud instances, and they just waited to see what would happen. And then they wrote a report about how quickly vulnerabilities that were inherent in in the environments that they were monitoring with these honeypots were attacked and were compromised. I thought that was a fascinating study. I mean, it's probably not intuitively new to any of us. I just thought it was interesting to put it in the form of a report that's based on data. So it's FUD, but it's like FUD based on
Reality.
some sort of testing in reality. And the key findings, they put various places. GitHub vulnerabilities were discovered within 2 minutes. I don't know where it was, but they said HTTP was compromised in 3 minutes. Secure Shell was compromised in 4 minutes. S3 buckets compromised in 3 minutes. We know that, but that to me is good information when you're trying to convince management or your customers or whomever that this is real. This is stuff that happens. I thought this was a good article. It's a white paper. I had originally found an article about the white paper, but then I just found the white paper. So go get the white paper. You have to give up your contact information. And I've already been friended on LinkedIn by the security evangelist from this company, Orca Security. Well, that's fine. I'll talk to him. But I've already unsubscribed from their mailing list. So it's relatively painless.
But in so many instances, you have to rely on third parties to bring influence to the organization, right?
Yep.
So many times when you go in front of your C-level executives, they look at you as the internal person with some level of motivation. But when you can bring third-party influence and statistics to the table, and many times that can influence investment. So it's needed. You need those third-party reports to bring to the table.
So you need a third party to say attackers are going after cloud infrastructure, and here's some support for that.
Yeah. It's bringing that outside support to the table.
I mean, it doesn't hurt. It certainly doesn't hurt your case, right?
No.
I can't tell you how many times
case.
I've been presenting to the customer our findings. I mean, going back, and I haven't done pen testing type of stuff in almost
going back
20
years. Yeah, I know where you're going. Like years since the beginning.
Since the beginning, you'd go in and you'd explain what in the pen testing days, this is what we did, this is how we broke in, this is what you need to do.
Oh, no one would do that.
And the managers, the suits, as I call them, that were like, oh, this is amazing stuff. We need to act on. We should do this. And I'd see all the people sitting on, all the important people are at the table, and all the people that know what's going on are on the fringes, but they've been invited to the meeting, and they're like, they've been telling their managers for months and years. But me as the third party coming in and saying that, and it's even true in the PCI world. I mean, this happens even to this day. And
I thought you were going to an even more challenging thing where, and I've been in meetings like this where the higher ups are actually have a seat at the table, but then in the larger conference rooms, there's seats along the wall, perimeter. And that's where all the people that do the actual work.
Right. Exactly. Right. There's 100%. The suits and the management at the table, and there's the people that do all the work on the side that know what's going on.
But the suits are deciding where the money goes.
Yeah. But even if you came in as a pen tester, in certain circumstances and presenting to a room like this, you may say, here's how we got in. We did X, Y, Z, got this, whatever data. They would say, well, no one's going to do that. And that's where you go back to what Jason and we're talking about was, well, yeah, not only do we do this like in your network, but studies show
that
attackers are doing the same thing as well. Right. And we proved that we can do it in your network. We almost need both in certain circumstances, Jeff.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, in the early days when I was doing this 25 years ago, the customers that I had, the suits, the management, their question was always, what's our competition doing? Because we don't want to do.
Tell me we've gotten away from that.
We want to. Yeah, it hasn't been as much lately, but it's still there. What's the idea of a best practice? It's what everybody does, so that when something bad happens, we can't be blamed for being negligent or being.
We were doing what everyone else was doing, and that makes
we were safe. Doing what was best practices. So it could happen to anybody.
But at the end of the day, you have these leaders sitting around the table saying, I have X amount of money to invest in this company, right? And I need to be able to determine where my best investment goes. Do I take the investment that would go to innovation of the company and growth of the company and transfer that over to protecting the company? We need to be able to articulate why you should do that.
Right.
Why you should take money that's going to grow this company, pull it away, and secure the company. This is why we need to understand the business. If we can understand the business, we can articulate the reason why you should do that.
And the reason why you should do that is not comparing yourself to what other companies are doing in your industry.
It's the risk based on
I dealt
your
with that
company,
a lot,
your culture.
but I dealt with that a lot in university, right? Like, happen to work for an Ivy League university. And oftentimes,
is an Ivy League university considered a non-profit, not-for-profit, or for-profit?
For-profit in your instance.
They are for. That's a good question.
They are
They're for-profit.
I thought they were non. I thought Ocean served only non-profit.
Ocean is the
organizations.
ISP,
right?
but they serve all universities in our state.
And so wait,
serve-
it's universities, colleges, and non-profits. I gotcha.
Right.
I gotcha.
You got it.
So, but especially in the Ivy League, right? If you're in Ivy League level of school, you would say, what are the other Ivy League schools doing to address this problem?
Right.
Because I think as a business leader, you don't want to overspend, but you also don't want to underspend. In a simplified way of understanding that is going, well, what's everyone else doing and how much are they spending? And let's just do what everyone else is doing.
That's the easy button.
That's the easy button.
That's the easy
That's the
button.
easy button.
The difficulty that we have is saying, here's what they're not doing, and here's how they're bringing risk to their organization. And this is why we should do this. Because there's...
What's transpired in the past 20 years, though, there's been some universities that have actually gone out of
Mandy has
business
something to
because
say.
of cyber attacks, which is interesting. Mandy.
Mandy.
I do have something to say. So, coming from a different industry, and we're needing to advise whatever it was, municipalities, legal entities, corporations on application of laws and what they were up against. I would usually say something about, well, $1 worth of prevention now is worth 10 in remediation later.
Agreed.
And if you don't do this, half of the time you're going to have to remediate. And that was a much faster, easier way than trying to convince them that I know all of these things on why you need to do this and why it's smart and where you can kind of fudge and where you can't. Because that was all they were really interested in.
Yeah.
So I think I agree absolutely with Jason, being able to articulate and to be that liaison that goes between the C-suite, the field, the people in the trenches, whatever. That's a glorious, needed, fantastic skill, and it does help bridge security long term.
Yeah.
But I think there's only, in my experience, it's generally 10% of people are possibly going to even be listening to you articulating the deep, they're not going to grasp why does this really matter until they understand what it's going to cost them.
I couldn't agree more. And you leaned on public sector because they're notorious for this, right? Deferred maintenance is a thing in the public sector.
Yeah.
This is why you have schools who've been around, the buildings have been around for 50, 80 years, and they neglected to put a new roof on the school.
Right.
They neglected to do the maintenance on the school.
They wait till it leaks.
They wait until the end, and it costs them triple the money to replace that infrastructure.
But that's still not going to convince business leaders. And I think, Mandy,
it's
what
hard.
you
It's hard.
kind of brought in my mind was something I used to use in university that I think we'd have a better story if we pitched it as a compliance thing, right? Back to compliance. I used to kind of pitch, look, we get a lot of grants to do a lot of research at this school, and attackers are going to come after that intellectual property. If we don't spend money on security, we may lose that intellectual property. But the kind of flip side of that for the business is, if we have breaches, like, we'll recover. Like, they're not as frequently as occurring. They're not going to happen to every research group. We're going to have them ensure we're going to recover, and we're going to get new grants, and we're going to be fine. What the real stick is, in order to get that grant, if the grant said you don't meet this minimum security compliance standard, you're not going to get the grant.
Agreed.
If it's pitched in that way, the business is like, oh, we need to do the security things to meet that level of compliance because we want to continue to get grants because that's what attracts students to the school. That's what attracts donors. That's what fuels this whole operation, or a large portion of that fuel for an Ivy League university, as an example, is we get research grants.
But it's a science to connect those dots.
Correct.
You have to understand the business to connect those dots.
But also, whoever's
Is it
issuing
science or is it art?
Well, both. But
and a science.
but also it hinges upon whoever is issuing the grant to put those requirements for that grant. I don't know today. Maybe someone in academia can tell me. I'd love to have this conversation, actually. Like, what requirements are there to get a grant today? Because I know 20 years ago when I was working, I can just venture a guess that there was not cybersecurity requirements. In order to get this grant, you got to meet this minimum level of cybersecurity. Because I knew what the level of cybersecurity was at the university I worked for 20 years ago, and the state 20 years ago was abysmal in terms of cybersecurity. Now we worked,
and it's a whole lot better now.
I don't. Maybe I don't know. I don't work in the academia today, so I don't know. I hope that it is
better. The same motivations are still there, though.
But I can also say that the time I worked there, we did make several improvements cyber from 2001 when I started.
The default passwords.
No,
No, you didn't.
No, in a lot of cases, no. In some cases, yes. In a lot of cases, no. Absolutely not. So. There's that. We did a lot of things to change, and it evolved. I assumed after I left, it continued to evolve. I'm curious today, though, but I want to
never make an assumption.
I'm curious, so I'm not making an assumption. I'm expressing my curiosity in how many grants have today a requirement for cybersecurity.
So here's the thing.
That'd be interesting.
To break it down to its basic level, the more shalls we have will make us mature. The shoulds. It's a crapshoot.
Right.
When it's a should, it's a decision on whether or not I should trade one thing for another. The shall is a have to have. You know, and it's putting the shalls in the grants. It's putting the shalls in the legislation. You have to do.
Well, Jason, you've talked several times tonight about putting it in the business context.
Yeah.
Which I agree with, but I think it needs to go further than that, and I believe that this thing that we call security, cybersecurity, whatever it is, it's relatively easy to break it down if you can do it right to help organizations, your leadership understand we have stuff that we don't want to lose. We need to stay in business. What is often not articulated is we're using all this amazing technology that enables us to do so many things. We don't properly, as InfoSec cybersecurity professionals, I don't think we do a good enough job of articulating and explaining to our customers and our management just simply that there's a cost to doing business. You're getting all this advantage and all this technological advancement, but it comes at a cost. And part of that cost is you need to do certain things. You need to invest in certain things to maintain some level of this mythological thing that we call security that is, as much as everybody else is doing, so we don't get blamed, or is enough to satisfy our cyber insurance provider or our regulatory compliance provider if we have one. I mean, we don't have enough of the frank discussion of, like we were talking about some of the vendors earlier, Fortinet. They do a good job of acknowledging, there's vulnerabilities, and there's going to be vulnerabilities, and when we discover them, we'll fix them. We'll let you know about it. We'll make things right, and that keeps it's lather, rinse, repeat. Lather, rinse, repeat. I don't think we do a good enough job. We, the collective we, of explaining to our clients and our management, our bosses, this is the price of doing business. This is what you have to do. Not what you should do. This is what you have to do. Unfortunately, there isn't enough because, they're putting it in their language, putting it in the business context, they're driven by regulatory compliance. We'll do it if we have to. We don't know what we're doing, but we don't understand it, but we'll do it if we have to, which is the beauty of PCI, by the way. You have to do it, even though they don't understand it. But finding that balance between explaining it to them so that it makes business sense.
But you also have to balance the regulatory side with another variable that we don't talk about enough is risk appetite. Because risk appetite is not just the regulatory piece. Right. It's about client need. No. So if you understand your customers, you understand their needs from a third-party vendor risk perspective, and now you can articulate, we will lose 30% of our customers if we don't do this.
Well, and to take that up a level, it's our revenue stream.
Sure, that's it. That's it.
That's the bottom.
Because it affects the
That's
pocket.
the business
It affects
language.
the revenue stream, right?
Yep.
So it's not just compliance. It's not just law. It's not just that. It's risk appetite based on all of those variables because you could lose a huge customer set.
Yep.
Right? You need to be able to articulate that, and that's understanding your business.
And fortunately, unfortunately, most customers aren't any more savvy than the companies that we're working with or for. And so the collective we have gotten away with stuff for so long so that we can not do the things that we need to be doing. And it doesn't really matter until something bad happens. And then it's like,
Or you answer answer incorrectly on a vendor risk assessment, and that customer comes back and says, "I no longer want to do business with you." Right.
Which are all different drivers than simply, well, you want to be secure and you want to protect your data and do it to some level, and it's really that level that we're talking about, which is risk.
You have to understand the appetite of the business.
I want to bring up another very important news article.
Please.
Rob Lee has shaved his beard.
What?
I just want to point this out. I want to, Mandy, before we get to you, this won't take long. It's just I thought I was giggling because this made the news segment. Like, this was new. I was on LinkedIn, legit. I was looking at LinkedIn today, and I saw this guy, Robert M. Lee, and I was like, there's got to be another Robert M. Lee. Like, that was, maybe there's some namespace collision in the Rob, because I'm like, that's not the Rob Lee that I know. I'm like, that's pretty cool that this other Rob Lee was presenting at a United Nations conference. He posted, yeah, I'm in Vienna.
Yeah. But his profile picture was changed too at the same time.
Yeah. Did he shave his beard because he was presenting?
I don't know. Maybe.
No, we don't know why. Rob, why did you shave your beard?
This is major news right now. But then I realized that this is not Rob Lee the imposter. This is actually Rob Lee.
Breaking news.
Look at that. There it is. Yes.
Breaking news.
Thank you, Gus.
Who is that person? I don't know who that. I don't know who that is.
And I swear to God, he looks like some actor, and I can't place it, but he looks like somebody. But I'm like, I saw that. I'm like, who is this?
For now, we'll go with Will Ferrell. But
no. No. No, not Will Ferrell.
We were watching the soccer movie with Will Ferrell. I forget what it's called.
So funny.
Oh my God, that movie's hilarious. Is that Robert Duvall? Who is that?
With his dad, where he has.
Is his dad Robert Duvall?
I think so.
That's the same Robert Duvall in The Godfather, right?
I think it might be. I think it might be. It's so funny.
The consigliere.
Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Now that we cleared that up.
All right. That should have been the last story, but maybe it was.
I wanted to make sure that we cover this very important.
I'll make sure that Rob knows that he needs to tune into this.
And he does not look like Will Ferrell.
Maybe he looks like a young Robert Duvall.
He looks like some character actor that I've seen on some show.
I would say it does look like pasted kind of a golden era of movie stars. It's like a Rock Hudson or something. It does have a very
Rat Pack era.
Who's the guy? Who's the guy in Eat the Food, You Fat Lord? Who's that guy? What was that movie?
Napoleon Dynamite?
Yeah, Napoleon Dynamite. No.
Pedro? He does not look like Pedro.
No.
I'm just busting Rob. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm just naming random actors.
There's got to be AI that you can put that picture in, and it'll tell you what actor it looks like.
Yes.
So, in case you didn't know, Dragos, the company that Rob founded, is based in Maryland. It's like 20 minutes from my house, and I've been hanging out with Rob for a while, and I know a bunch of the Dragos
Another Maryland
people.
person I need to hang out with. I need to come back to Maryland.
And one of the things that they do at their headquarters is they brew beer.
They shave people?
No, they brew beer. and it's an open invite. Anybody wants
if
to
I
come,
go there, he's going to shave my beard?
Free barber services.
You don't have a beard, Paul.
But I like his PR tactic, though. Like, grow a beard for I think this was a long game.
No, but Rob. He had like he had like a.
But I think it's a long
5,
game.
10 year.
I think it's a long game. I think he's like I'm going to grow a 5-10, and then all of a sudden one day he'd marked a date in his calendar. He's like, I'm going to shave my beard, and then I'm just going to change all my social media things, and I'm just going to start posting pictures without my beard, and I'm going to get so much press coverage that Paul Security Weekly is going to cover the fact that I shaved my beard.
And it worked.
It was his game all along.
It worked.
And you know what? I totally respect him for that. It worked. I think it's great.
And I think it also ran on CNBC. But whatever.
I'm going to turn on the news. And in other news, Rob Lee has shaved his beard.
I love the fact that he did it so nonchalantly. Here I am in Vienna. I'm speaking at United Nations conference about IoT, which he's very passionate about.
Yeah, like if I make a big fashion change.
Oh, by the way, I don't have a beard anymore.
Yeah.
And his profile picture on LinkedIn is he's updated it with him without a beard.
I got a new hat. Like, what does everyone think? Like, I'm like, I trim my eyebrows differently. Like, what do you think? I am very in tune with if
You're not
I make
keeping
a
up with the
change
nose
to my
hair trimming,
appearance,
though, Paul.
right? When I do, I'll make a social media post about it. I'm like, what do you think about the new nose hairstyle?
When I buy
Like,
a
what do
new
you think?
Patriots jersey, I post about it.
Dude, totally. I'm wearing a new New England
Cole
Revolution
Strange, dude, I
jersey.
got the Cole Strange jersey.
Did you notice my new New
I
England
did.
Revolution?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
I need to make a post about this.
Is that what is that?
New England Revolution.
soccer
It's our
team.
local
It's our
MLS soccer team.
Football
Soccer.
team?
Yeah. Soccer.
Football.
Nice.
Football. Yes.
Football.
So, did you? Just for the hell of it, I decided to ask Bard what that was a photograph of with a link to his new profile picture. Anybody want to guess? Because it didn't mention Rob.
I would love to know.
Michael J. Fox.
That's the Large Hadron Collider near Geneva,
So
the world's most powerful particle accelerator.
Right?
it got his location, but not him.
No, he's in Vienna.
Aaron.
It's like, wow.
No, I was going to ask Aaron. Are you a
is
Man
Aaron
City
still
fan?
awake?
Is Aaron a Man City fan?
Are you there? So,
Are you a Man City fan?
well, hold on.
sorry.
And now, Aaron.
Fubar, isn't that German?
Now, hold on, Aaron. I got two questions for you now. One, if you were to shave your beard, would you do it the way Rob Lee did it, or would you shave it? Would you even shave your beard?
I don't think I'll ever shave my beard after 20 years in the military of them making me have a face like a baby
Damn
boy.
straight, brother. Damn
it's
straight.
like
Yeah, you still have a
bald
baby face. I can see it.
It's like, what do you call a man without a beard?
A woman?
A woman. A woman, yeah.
So,
A woman.
so my next
woman.
question for you, Aaron, is what is your favorite soccer team in terms of
my
like
Man City question.
yeah,
Thank you very
in terms
much.
of like real soccer, not MLS.
Football.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm the most dreadful person to ask about this, as I follow rugby. But when I was a child, I did follow Manchester United.
Okay.
If people want to send me hate, they can.
Ronaldo played for Manchester
What's your
United.
favorite rugby team then?
Sort of Ulster, which is where I come from, or Ireland, of course. So I mostly follow international rugby.
Glad we got that clear.
International rugby. So that's Ireland, England, and what other country?
Well, Ireland are currently the #1 team in the world, which is very unusual at the moment. So we're coming into a Rugby World Cup.
What
in
other
the-
countries do play rugby?
Oh, as Australia, New
say
Zealand.
Australia. Yeah.
So
And
British.
a lot
South
in the
Africa.
islands, like the Caribbean islands.
Oh yeah, it's like most countries play rugby, but well, when you say play rugby, it's like American soccer, right? They attend football, they don't play it.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
Well, do you know
This
why?
is
I
what
asked-
I'm getting at.
Here's
Like,
my-
what countries really play rugby?
Shots fired. You know, Messi's going to play in the MLS
Yeah,
now.
Miami.
that's
He went to
really
Miami.
exciting. But
We
he's
went
gonna
to the
be-
Miami, so that's where I got the
did you go there?
jersey.
Did you
So
go
we
that
went
game?
to the.
But he wouldn't. He wasn't there.
He
yet.
wasn't.
He
He
was not
wasn't there
Messi was
yet.
not
And then
there.
we were like, "Oh, how do
At
you
Gillette.
get tickets to the games where Messi is going to play in the MLS for Miami?" It turns out, even when you ask that question, every game is sold out already.
Yeah.
Every single
they
game.
laugh at you when you ask that.
They
question.
laughed. They laughed. They're
laugh
like,
at you.
"What
They laugh at you.
tickets? What
They
do you?"
laugh at you.
They're $500 to $3,500 a
Oh,
ticket
easy,
secondhand now.
Isn't he getting a like David Beckham type deal that he's going to get
Yes.
part of an MLS team, which is pretty cool.
Dude, he struck a deal that in my InfoSec career, and many of us in our InfoSec careers could only dream to get. Like, his deal is like, I own part of the team. I own part of the revenue from Apple TV that broadcasts all the things.
Yeah.
I get like free massages, a whole fleet of cars, like a unicorn,
but
like
at the end of the
whatever
day-
you want
At
to
the
get
end of
there.
the day, it's the revenue of Miami FC. Globally, think about the impact.
But it's
of that.
also the revenue. But it's also a portion of the revenue of the broadcast company
Of
that's
Miami
broadcasting
FC. Of Miami-
just
of
Miami
Miami
FC.
FC.
Is that was
just
that the deal?
Miami FC.
It's still a pretty sweet deal.
Oh, believe me, I would not.
Right?
I would turn that
I
down
wouldn't shake
for
a stick
anything.
at that. That's-
Hell no. Hell no. No way.
I
He
do
got
think
a
it's
way
pretty
better deal
cool.
than Beckham got way back in the day.
Well, no,
Way
Beckham got a whole MLS team, didn't he?
Not a whole. He got a portion of an MLS team.
Hey,
The
I
Galaxy.
thought he
the Galaxy.
was it
the
not
LA
that-
Galaxy.
yeah,
It's a portion
it was,
of.
Yeah, I think he's done okay.
Oh God!
Sorry. That
Again,
was a-
I will not say he did not do okay.
That was a tangent.
So shifting gears a little bit.
yeah, running
And-
Linux on an
and-
Asus
and-
ROG Ally gaming handheld.
No, that wasn't where I was going to go.
That's where I wanted to go.
Gee.
Go ahead, do that. No.
Have you seen the Steam Deck? Steam Deck is amazing.
No.
Linux device. It runs Arch under the covers and lets you play games through a subsystem that emulates Windows. Proton. I knew I was going to say, yep, Proton. They'll let you do that. Awesome. Goose has one. Our production
Ooh,
engineer,
nice,
Goose, has one.
Nice. Look at you.
Asus came out with a competitor. I want to say this one's higher priced than the Steam Deck. Or, I don't know, there's different models of each. But the Asus model runs Windows, not Linux. And it's a handheld. It's kind of like, Goose, correct me if I'm wrong, like they want to compete with the Nintendo Switch kind of platform and give people that handheld,
Mobile kind of?
immersive gaming
Yeah.
experience, right? Like, yes. Right.
Oh no shit! Wow.
It is. Okay. Yeah. So some folks have gone, I don't want to run Windows on my Asus ROG Ally gaming handheld. I want to run Linux. But what they have to do is disable secure boot to get Linux running. And Linux supports secure boot. However, my thinking is, and I almost want to validate this. There's almost like a really good excuse to go, Paul needs to go buy some Linux handheld gaming devices. Like, I need a Steam Deck for comparison.
You're doing research.
I'm doing research. I need this Asus ROG Ally gaming handheld because I need to do some research that the secure boot certificates they put on it don't support the certificates that are in the shim to boot Linux. And so therefore, if you have one of these devices, you don't have the Microsoft third-party CA certificate on there that allows you to boot Linux. Therefore, you would have to put all your own certificates on there and use MockUtil to then create signatures for all of the software that you're going to boot, which is a huge pain in the butt. And I don't recommend. I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
It is totally possible. There's tutorials out there to do it. I don't recommend it because then you're responsible for
It's a lot of overhead.
all the future updates.
That's
so
a lot
it's
of overhead.
overhead.
That's a lot of overhead.
In other words, if your kernel changes or your modules change, you need to then
need to go
use
with
your own keys to make hashes for those things and put them in the DB that is signed by the key that you generated on the system. Again,
Too much work.
totally possible. Like Intel and Microsoft did a great job to go totally possible, but a lot of work. So the thing right now is just disable secure boot on it, which, okay, I mean, on a little Linux handheld, that's probably fine. I mean, okay, you're making some trade-offs there, but secure boot
making
was
a risk-based
designed,
decision.
a risk-based decision, and secure boot was designed to support that. It would be neat, I think, if Asus just said, look, we're going to support Linux. And from the get-go, usually it's the OEM like Asus that goes, I'm going to put these certificates on there that you can run Linux or Windows on it and have secure boot enabled. So I thought it was an interesting kind of secure boot kind of thing that was happening on here, but also really cool hardware. There was another story I wanted
Did
to
you
cover.
put the GitHub one up there?
No. Oh, but before we end, I wanted to make sure we got into the I killed your smart meter and made it smoke thing. So it was actually Vlad got a Mesky. How do you say his last name, Jeff? Gostameski?
You had it right when you interviewed him.
Dude, I nailed it when he was on the show. I nailed it. Vlad that was on our show
Vlad.
shared with me this video of someone using a Flipper Zero to communicate with a smart
What's
meter.
that right there?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, a Flipper Zero. I always
Zero.
keep one handy. when they said that you could use a flipper zero to like affect people's pacemakers, I was trying to hack Jeff's pacemaker. But
You were-
I was pointing right at Jeff. Didn't
it was
work.
so funny.
I need to update firmware.
Ironically, it's because I don't have one.
Well, I have a pacemaker, but in the video,
it was a good guess though.
they're using what I believe is probably the sub gigahertz chipset on the Flipper Zero to interact with a smart meter that was essentially turning the power on and off to the system. And when you do that, kind of like the Aurora attack that we covered.
Yeah.
Lee, you're like, I don't know, in some distance to where those experiments were conducted, right? Similar to that, they were turning it off and then on again. That would, through radio communications and software, have physical effects to the hardware and cause the smart meter to smoke and blow up. And they had a compressor
and it
for...
obscures the display, so you can't see what's going on.
Correct.
Yep.
And I was like... So Vlad sent that to me a few weeks ago. And I was like, Vlad, that's really kind of... I mean, that's interesting. I'm like, I have a... First, a respect for like someone that wants to pull off a hack like that. If you really did pull it off, like that's really cool. Second, I really hope you had permission to that test equipment, because when we as hackers interact with things, if we're going to cause physical damage, it's in a controlled experiment, like the Aurora experiment, that we do those kinds of things. And it didn't look, it looked like a residential
Rules of engagement
environment. Hackaday ran an article, ironically enough, contacted an expert, and I forget who that person's name was, but contacted an expert, like many people we know that could serve as the expert in this case, and was like, basically, this is a hoax. Like, looked at, zoomed in on the video to the serial numbers and all the equipment involved, and was like, I'm pretty sure this was a hoax. I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Because I was like, how do you have a video of you using a Flipper Zero to destroy stuff that was clearly not in a lab environment? This was clearly, it looked like the exterior of a home.
It looked like it was
in like
outside of a house.
any environment.
Yeah.
Like, so
Right.
how are you just going up to a random building or home and destroying the equipment? Like, that meter, and those of you that have like owned homes and had to replace your compressor for your air conditioning system, it's $3,000 to $5,000 to $7,000. There's a range.
Easy.
I would venture a guess to replace your compressor for your air conditioner is $3,000 to $7,000.
I just paid $6,000
there you go.
for my compressor to be
Replaced with a new one.
With a new one.
Because they only last so long.
And you wanna know what
How long
happened?
do you have that old one? 20 years?
No, it was
No?
a 6-year-old compressor.
Ooh.
I built my house 6 years ago.
You
But
sucker.
But I had a rodent who got inside of my AC system and blew everything up and destroyed the compressor.
See, I had a rodent.
Did you overfeed your rodent?
I did not have my IoT device that fed
Funny
my
story.
rodents set to
Funny
the
story.
rodent.
Funny story. My old compressor for my air conditioner, and for all you hackers out there, try this first. I had a rodent that when I opened up so I killed the power. Like, I'm not an electrician. And I'm like,
You killed the rodent?
Yeah,
No,
I didn't kill the rodent. The rodent
the
killed
AC
himself.
system killed the rodent.
Yes. But in an AC system, there's a fuse that you pull.
You can pop it
from the wall, which kills all the power from it. So you can safely pull that out.
It's that
Even if you're not an electrician, you can see where it is. You pull it out. It's totally fine. I'm like, all right, power's all out. I open up the compressor case and I look at the capacitor, because it takes a lot of electricity and power to power on a compressor for the first time. So they use a capacitor to store up some of that electrical energy to power it on. And so I looked at the capacitor, and over the 2 contact points for that capacitor was a rodent.
That's where my rodent was.
So this rodent just shorted my capacitor. So I was like, what are the chances I can look at the model number for my capacitor and go order one on
It's
Amazon?
so funny. I did the same thing.
$75.
Paul, I did the same thing, and I put the new capacitor in, and it didn't work.
So your motor fried. In my case, I was
out.
lucky. I replaced my capacitor myself. So I was like, all right, when a new capacitor came in, I pulled the thing again. I'm like, this is just 2 wires. I can handle that. Like,
Did the same
whatever.
thing. Yeah.
Did the thing.
Yeah.
50,
I think it was only-
$75. Replace my
Yeah, it
capacitor.
was only
I wish.
$5 last year.
What's
I
that?
did that on. I did that last year on the unit where I was living then, and I think it was only $25
Yep.
for the
Yeah.
capacitor. Like, it was.
Yeah, unfortunately for me, it blew my
It blew them. Yeah,
it blew the compressor.
it blew the
It blew
the compressor motor. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that poor rodent, man, you could see where he.
It was like a skeleton, dude.
Oh my god.
Oh, it was like a skeleton. Because you can
so
imagine the charge that
So I tried the DIY side of it, but it unfortunately didn't work. And it was about $6K later.
I don't know where. Oh, so this was a hoax, which was the. I was like, oh, okay, because I was concerned in this article. It hints towards it of like the ethics around doing this kind of thing. I'm like, I hope you have permission
in a quote unquote live environment.
Yeah, I was very concerned. Also very concerned they used a Flipper Zero, which already has like a bad reputation. They can't be sold on Amazon kind of thing. And again, kind of goes to the tools we use. I'm not a big fan of banning the tools we use because people use them for evil purposes. This is my hammer.
Professionally, this is where rules of engagement come into play.
Right. But my thing is don't blame the tool. And this is my hammer example.
Right.
And God rest his soul, it was Mike Murray that gave this example on our show when we interviewed him and we talked about the hammer. He said, look, Paul, he told me, he's like, look, Paul, I can get a hammer. He's like, I can go build a house with it, right?
Yep.
And do amazing things. He's like, or I can get a hammer and I can go bash people in the face. Should you hold the company that makes that hammer liable for how people use it?
There's so many discussions around
Hammers
that we could
don't kill people. People kill people.
We could go down a rabbit hole on that conversation.
But when we get to the Flipper Zero, is it the company that makes the Flipper Zero that's like, you can't sell these on Amazon because people could do bad things with them? Well, all right. Okay, let's go down the list of things you can buy on Amazon that could hurt people. Like, give me a break.
Right.
So, qualifying question. What is the intended use for good of a Flipper Zero?
Research.
Oh, I have tons of. I lost my remote for some of the TVs in my home. I have the codes for thousands of remotes programmed into my Flipper Zero. When I get a new universal remote, how do I give it the codes of the remote that I lost? Oh, I used my Flipper Zero to program those codes. If I forget my RFID card for the cigar lounge next door, well, I made a copy of that on my Flipper Zero, so I used my Flipper Zero to get it. So the list would go on. Yeah,
there's a level,
and there's a lot of cool hacking things too. I can manipulate televisions, anything sub gigahertz with it for legitimate things.
It's a universal remote, essentially.
For a lot of different radio frequencies, universal remote is one use case for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you can use it to pop the charging port on Tesla vehicles.
Or you can turn off the TVs at the bar that you're at.
Correct.
When a bunch of bros are watching the NBA finals.
And you want to mess with them.
You want to mess with them. I got it.
It's all about intent.
You can do that too. So anyway, I thought it was interesting. I haven't watched the whole video about the person who kind of debunks this, but basically they said the smart meter that's in use doesn't have this functionality and presents a lot of evidence that this was an elaborate ruse, if you will.
So my story number one.
Let's talk about. Oh yes, I want to talk about your story number one.
Was the fact that the newly appointed position of National Cyber Director, which was filled by Chris Inglis.
Yep.
And he retired.
Also on the hit list.
Retired.
Oh, I didn't know that. I can make that happen. I know Chris. Given the last couple of weeks with the, what was that thing we were talking about before? MoveIT.
MoveIT.
Sort of some big deal vulnerabilities, exploitations, and the fact that it's hitting a lot of different companies and organizations, and this position has not been filled yet, and there hasn't even been a nomination for the position. I don't know why there hasn't been a nomination for the position yet, but this article was like, geez, all this stuff's happening, and we've got this void because there's nobody at the national U.S. level.
Was it Dick Clark that held this position before, or was he a different position before this position was?
Dick Clark?
Yes. Richard Clark.
No, this was Chris Inglis.
Yeah, but I'm saying before that.
No, I
There
think-
was no-
I think
What's
Chris
the
was
history?
first.
What-
There was
I-
no position.
Chris
This was
was
a new
first.
Was
position.
that the cybers? What was Richard Clark? Was the
He was,
cyber
he was
czar?
wasn't he? Was the executive branch
He was-
cybersecurity?
Dick Clark was America's top 40. I don't know what you're talking what you're talking
I'm talking George Bush, and then Clinton. Cyber czar, was that the position before?
cyber czar.
maybe,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Cyber czar was
Yep.
before this position was created.
Yeah,
which I feel like
think
they're
I don't think there's
similar.
a cyber czar anymore.
No. I think you're right. I think it evolved into this position, right? I'm just trying to get the history of who.
Howard Schmidt.
Mandy?
The first cyber czar was Howard Schmidt.
Yes, Howard Schmidt. Yes. And then, so what was the position that Richard Clark held? As we all Google.
Yeah, no. I mean, Chris Inglis was
But Chris Inglis was, I mean, there was,
the first national director of cybersecurity.
National Director of
under the
Cybersecurity.
executive office of the president.
newly appointed position.
It says he was at the
Counterterrorism.
first part of cybersecurity and counterterrorism.
Yes.
Yep.
In the Bush administration, he was
Slightly
Assistant Secretary for Political and Military Affairs.
Well, the article talks about
It was
the fact that there's this
There was
this big vulnerability
This big,
that's
vo-
being
this big void
exploited,
in leadership.
that's impacting a lot of different organizations and a lot of different industries and verticals, and there's no national leadership to try.
Sorry,
to
it was
pull
The
it.
Fifth Domain by Richard Clark was the
Fifth
book that I read. Yeah,
Okay.
that was a good one. And he held a similar position to Chris English before. I think the history of those positions are. I think it make a great blog post for those that want to write that. Cybersecurity kind of advisors over time.
I
I
mean,
think, Mandy, to your point, starting with Howard Schmidt and moving on in U.S. history, who have those advisors been, to kind of lead up to how significant it is to not have that position filled today.
If you think about the government and how it's built, the executive branch is the business of the government. And to
That's
not,
true. That's
and
a
to
great way to
not
think
have a
of it.
cybersecurity leader in that position of the business of the government, the operations of our government,
Yeah, who sits?
sends a message.
It does send a message, but on
Because
the
who
other
sits at the
hand,
table when you're advising the president, right? It's military leaders, interfaces to other countries. Who was, but that's the Secretary of State.
Then it's the
kind
secretary.
of
Then
thing,
it's
right?
all the different secretaries because there's Secretary of Commerce,
'Cause Commerce,
Secretary
right,
of State.
right.
Then
Who's
there is-
representing-
Who's representing
it's called the
cybersecurity?
cabinet.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Jeff.
But
Yes.
who's sitting at
Who's
the
in the
table?
to Jeff's point?
Yes,
Who's in the cabinet?
that's right.
Representing cybersecurity.
And if we want to lead by example, why is that position unfilled?
Yeah, that's a big.
Well,
That's kind of
a
similar to
huge question.
having one of the secretaries in the cabinet
So
missing.
where,
That's a
where are the
yeah.
where is the priority of our executive branch? Where is the priority of
think
the
about the
business of
message-
government?
I will say in the current administration, though, the focus on cybersecurity has been pretty sound. I mean, we've got some executive orders. We've got. I mean, I work in the supply chain
Yep.
area, and there has been a lot of effort, a lot of executive orders, and a lot of pushes to have regulations, to have positions of power in recommending supply chain
But
security.
where
as
is
an
that
example.
central voice?
Right. Is that the director of Homeland Security? Homeland
Is
Security.
it though?
plan?
Then you want to know what we need to communicate that
because
this is
they
the new.
Homeland Security focuses on what's within the borders.
Yeah, no,
Right.
you're right. You're right.
Where is the
Does that-
voice for the executive branch?
What I love about the conversation we had already is that in my content planning for this show, which I don't often kind of share the ins and outs of that with the audience, right? Because it's inside baseball. But inside baseball, I try and focus on a topic every 2 months, right? If you notice, the past few weeks or so has been focused on pen testing, right? We're rounding out kind of the pen testing. We're talking a lot about pen testing as a topic. And that was very much on purpose because I want to spend 2 months talking about pen testing. I have 2 months set aside, I don't know where it falls in the schedule, to talk about critical infrastructure, security policy at a national level security. Folks like Chris Inglis and many others, Chris Krebs, as an example, are on the list of people. I probably have 10 or a dozen people on that list. I don't know, Mandy, you saw the list before. I don't know if you saw that section. There's a hit list of people involved in like national cybersecurity policy issues, and I want to spend 2 months talking about that because I think it's important. I think it's a great topic to talk about. It's an opportunity to invite guests on that have expertise in that area to talk about exactly what we're talking about here. To answer the questions, why don't we have a national cybersecurity director? Who should fill that position? What policy should we have? How do all the different branches work in terms of supporting this initiative? Mandy.
Well, I want to go back to this because there's a few points that come to mind on, it's incredibly important. And when I participated in Hackers on the Hill, I got the opportunity to meet with the legislative director for Robert Langevin, who was one of the founders. Who
retired, right? I mean, we did that interview with him.
I was on his cybersecurity advisory committee.
Right,
Bob
Langevin, I was on his cyber advisory committee. Yeah.
Most of us in Rhode Island involved in cybersecurity had some interaction with him or his office or something, right? Yeah.
Yep, Congressman Langevin, I'm telling you, he was an evangelist.
Oh, I agree.
He was cool, and he was also incredibly capable at showing how somebody who's differently abled or disabled was.
Yes, 100% agreed.
Oh my God, yes.
100% agreed.
A couple of points from that meeting that I found really interesting were in discussing, because I was talking to him specifically about domestic terrorism. That was more what the discussion was, and on cyber terrorism, but within the borders of the U.S. and then things that were going on externally. And he brought up, he goes, about how difficult it was because Homeland Security was mostly focused on only things that were internal. But I didn't realize this. He talked about how it was so hard for the legislation to try to keep pace, not only because of the fast nature of the internet, digital environments, the things that were going on, how fast hackers and technology were progressing, but also because the laws that they were required to work within came from maritime law.
So antiquated. So antiquated. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think things like that are trying to understand and have some respect for the legislators and the people who are trying to create the regulations, because they are still tiptoeing around. Like, they may know that it needs to be very, very different. Yeah. And they may be doing a lot of things we're not even aware of. I think things like that.
I think it's interesting, to your point, Mandy, what I've read, and some of that was in Richard Clark's book, was, and some of it I kind of got like from other sources, that around the time in 2001, think about 2001, pre-September 11th, the digital presence, the digital kind of revolution was happening, and there was a lot of people thinking about, how does this impact privacy?
Yeah.
How does this impact the security of our nation and our critical infrastructure? And there was legislation kind of in the works, from what I'm told, that addressed these privacy issues. There was a similar GDPR friggin' law before September 11th that was going to be passed. There was progress being made convincing the president and the cabinet that we needed to pay attention to cybersecurity before we even called it cybersecurity. Then, hold on.
What were the roadblocks, though?
Then the roadblock was September 11th happened. September 11th happened. Everyone,
but the roadblock,
it's not a roadblock.
The roadblock before that, Paul, was Congress, the Senate, and the executive branch could not get on the same page.
True.
They could not agree.
But the focus after September 11th, the focus changed to terrorists are the enemy. We need to go after terrorists.
Sure. But what happens when an organization gets breached? Now all of a sudden they're motivated to change.
Right.
It's the lag measure versus the lead measure.
But I think the U.S. was breached in a very much physical terrorist sense. I'm not taking anything away from that by any stretch.
Yep.
And the top of everyone's mind was, how do we go after terrorists? And it wasn't so much cyber criminals and how they I think took 20 years to kind of come full circle to go.
Agreed.
It's happening in the digital sense. I think that from a cybersecurity perspective, set us back a little bit. And I don't think I fault anyone for reacting to the imminent threat that was happening. I don't fault anyone for that, right? But I think it changed the conversation that pushed cybersecurity a little bit kind of to the side to go, we need to focus on the physical threat and the again, I don't blame anyone for that. If anyone's visited the 9/11 Memorial in New York, I mean, you relive that whole experience, which I think is important and everyone should do. And it was an unbelievable experience. And again, I don't fault anyone for doing that, but I think that was just the kind of facts. We put feelings aside. Those are the facts that kind of shaped how we formed policy and response in this country. And it fell by the wayside. The interesting fact for me is how we had that GDPR legislation that was almost ready to start like being pushed through as law, but our priorities shifted once 9/11 happened. And again, it is what it is, right? And I don't fault anyone for that necessarily, but that's kind of the historical record.
It bumped the geopolitical military risk to the top.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. 9/11 happened, and it was for a short period of time what some number of people that like me that were like working for security organizations trying to explain to our clients, you need to think about security, you need to think about all these things. And most of what we were talking at the time was hypothetical. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. 9/11 happened, and like, that could happen. So there was a lot of focus. I'm like, oh yeah, we've got your attention now. But for whatever reason, that was short-lived. It had the attention for a while, and it certainly made a difference, because it was like we no longer had to speak about the hypothetical. Well, all these bad things could happen because you have all these vulnerabilities. That could happen because of these vulnerabilities. But, you know, not trying to assign blame, but, you know, just the nature of humans and organizations, we have a short attention span, and we got beyond that. And it took a little while, but, you know, but for a couple years after 9/11 happened, yeah, everybody was like, okay, yeah, we need to start thinking about this. But eventually, the pragmatic things about the budgets, the you know, the spends, because this all is economic in nature, where and I have this theory that, you know, in terms of risk in the private sector, you know, if you're a commercial organization and you're in some sort of business where you're engaging in commerce and you're selling something, your risk is the ability to engage in commerce and generate revenue. That's one aspect, and the second aspect is the cost of doing business. You know, there was focus for a while, but everybody falls back to, yeah, well, it hasn't happened to us yet. You know, we've never had any problem before, but it could happen. Yeah, but it hasn't happened yet. So while there was attention for a while, and it changed the discussion, it didn't last, and ultimately it falls back to where we are today. And I think Jason would agree with this, where companies, organizations, they're making economic risk decisions based 100%. On finance. It's all about money, and it's like, how much do we want to spend to prevent the likelihood of something bad happens? But we can't really.
It's where do I put my cash on hand or investment that I need to mortgage? At the end of the day, right? It's about the spend. And we have to be able to articulate, this is where the priority of the spend needs to be, above other priorities that the rest of the business unit leaders are going to bring to the table, right? We have to be able to articulate that. The only way to articulate that is to know the business. You have to. And you have to be able to create.
But you bring up a great point, though, Jason. I think it's empathy with the business leaders about prioritizing that.
You need to have a relationship with the business leaders.
I think there's a significant lack of empathy for the business leaders about that justification for spend.
Paul, if I as a CISO walk in the door to the CEO and say, I need, and I don't have the support of the rest of the business unit leaders, I fail, right? If I can bring influence to the table and have the discussions ahead of time with all of these business unit leaders, and we come together as a collaborative in front of the board, in front of the CEO, in front of the CFO, and we all agree that this is the priority, we influence, we make change.
Right.
We have to know the business. We have to have relationships with those leaders. Have to.
Yes.
It's a must.
Yeah.
Well, I'll characterize it this way. I mean, back around the time of 9/11, early 2000s, we would, the company that I was working for, we were a commercial security services pen testing company. We're trying to help companies secure their environment. We were doing a pen testing, by my definition at the time, 20 years ago. Trying to discover vulnerabilities, trying to just help companies understand you're on the internet now, and that's introducing a certain amount of vulnerability, a certain amount of risk. We tried to.
I'd say it's exposing vulnerabilities,
perhaps
not introducing.
Not introducing,
Exposing
but exposing. Making.
I know you're a stickler for terms, Jeff.
I am a stickler.
I'm trying to keep you honest. I'm trying to keep you honest, man.
That's fair. But 20-some years ago, 22, 23 years ago, we were having a hard time trying to convince companies to care. Gee,
to have a firewall.
That's
you should have
that's
a
not
firewall.
a problem anymore, is it these days?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But trying to articulate, how do you put it in a business context? How do you put it into the, there's a cost to doing business. You're getting all sorts of this economic advantage of using this universal global backbone for connectivity and information sharing. And it was hard then, and it's hard now to convince companies to care, to have an interest. Why should I worry about this? This
But
has never
Jeff,
happened
why
before.
though? Why we haven't broken the barrier of technical risk? We're a technologist versus business risk.
Right.
We haven't broken the barrier. We need to do a better job of breaking that barrier. This isn't just an IT problem. This is a business risk. And if we can articulate that better, we're going to get more influence. I'm telling you right now, we will get.
I agree with you, and
Not
we
just
we
that.
tend to blame them, but what you're describing is really our problem.
Yes.
We're not doing
We're not speaking the language of the business.
Right. But we also have to get past the us versus them. I mean,
Yes.
not only
Agreed.
building the
we're
relationship
on the same
between
team.
the business unit leaders, but you've also got things like, for example, by where I am at the National Lab, cybersecurity has its own budget that comes from headquarters, ultimately from Congress, separate from other funding streams for the lab. And like all other direct funding streams, 65% of my budget goes to overhead operations, like keeping the lights on, the IT department. Everybody who's direct
Keeping
funded
your
loses
people employed.
65% of their budget.
Keeping your people employed.
But the point is, it makes me as an equal in terms of those mission programs that I need to help do the right thing with cyber.
Right.
So we're in the same boat together. And so that is an equalizer. It builds a relationship. If you're under the same kind of constraints as the folks you're talking to, it's a very different conversation than if I'm a tax on your budget.
There's that thing I say with my family. I say we're all on the same team.
Yep.
Right.
And running a business is the same thing.
Right.
Well, hold on. We're all on the same team. We all have the same mission, objective, and goals. We're all on the same team. And you got to align all of those missions, goals, mission, objectives, and then goals.
Yes.
Right? And security is very much a part
But it's
of
also
that.
about your level of influence. Because at the end of the day, if you're sitting there and you're
As a husband or dad, I have very little influence.
You're the man.
But here's
You
the
have
thing.
no influence.
This
ahead,
is
Jason.
where we get into the debate of where in the org chart a CISO belongs. Right? Where in the org
Oh,
chart
wow,
does
you're
a CISO
going-
belong? No, but because here's the thing.
9:27 at night, and you're going there.
No. I'm going to end it. I'm going to end it on this. Do we need to have a conversation with our leadership through a filter, or is it a direct conversation? Because if I'm going through the filter of a CIO, it's the filter of the motivations of the CIO.
Well,
if I'm going through the CFO, it's the motivations of the CFO.
25 years ago, Jason, the argument was whether the CISO, and I don't even know if that was the term then, the person that was responsible for security, and we didn't even call it cyber back then, should it report to the CFO or the CIO or the CTO? We had huge debates.
There wasn't even a conversation of it reporting to the CEO.
No, never.
Right.
No.
What filter do you want?
And we haven't.
I
we
argue
haven't solved that
be.
problem.
I argue there shouldn't be a filter.
That's my point.
It should go to the
There
CEO.
should not
Right.
be a filter when it comes to cyber risk. Technology runs every business. I don't care if you're in the restaurant business. I don't care what business you're in. Your technology runs your business today. You should have a direct path to your CEO, to your board of directors.
You know, I don't care if that gets renamed to the chief risk officer,
Agreed.
chief security officer.
Agreed.
That needs to be an arm.
The title is irrelevant. The responsibility is what matters.
Crap that goes bad, keeping tabs on the money, keeping the business running, right? So that's your chief operating officer, that's your CFO, that's your CSO or chief risk officer, or whatever it is. Those are three major areas. If you're
100%.
in a technology company or emerging, whatever it is, you should have a CTO that is pushing innovation. That's your innovation arm,
That's
is
it.
your CTO,
That's it.
right?
And you should have
as a CEO,
peer.
you should have those 4 people reporting to you.
Right. You know my career path. My career path was I started as a CISO in an enterprise technology services company. I was able to take security and make it a revenue generating department. From there, the CEO said, I want you to become CIO because I want you to do the same thing from a technology implementation perspective.
Right.
My negotiation was, I will never drop the CISO term. I want to be CIO and CISO. I'm not going to drop it. You want me to take this position? Security needs to be the foundation of everything we do.
Right. And
You don't want me?
in your
I
case,
will
that
go
makes
somewhere
sense.
else.
Yeah. No, but in your case, that makes sense.
Right.
But does that position hold for every
No,
business
it
vertical?
It does not.
No,
does not.
it depends
does
on the
not.
vertical.
It does not.
And I have a question going back, Paul, to your point about the security practitioners having more empathy for the business owners. So whether you're talking about that as you're a CISO to the CEO, or are you talking about that more from an external side, like when you're actually advising a company, like for your clients?
I think it's both, man.
All of the
right?
above.
Yeah,
It's
all
all
of
of
the
the
above.
above.
Yeah, it's all the above.
Okay.
Empathy is a huge
All of the above.
part. Empathy plays into a lot of different.
You need to understand the motivations of your business unit leaders within the company, but you also need to be able to
empathy is not about the understanding motivations. It's understanding how they feel.
Yeah, I want to ask more about
it's
that.
more
because
about understanding how they
But
feel.
what influences what they feel? What's the
Well, there's a
influence?
lot of things that influence how they feel, right?
It's what's going to make them successful.
Right, monetary gain,
Totally.
culture,
100%.
the whole,
100%.
the whole gamut.
But you also need to understand the same things on the client side, because those are the folks who
Yes.
want to do business with
Yes.
your company.
Right. What you've got to become is a mission enabler for them. Yes, you got to learn what's important, but don't be a blockade. They've got to see you as somebody enabling their success.
That is right.
If you're not coming off in that capacity, you're going to fail.
You're going to be a
I know,
roadblock.
by
But
the
Lee, to
way,
your point,
while
I
you're
don't-
figuring it out. You can't take too long.
The business
but I
will
don't think
bulldoze
you
if you're a
can
roadblock.
you can enable the business unless you have empathy. Empathy is huge.
yeah.
Is
Oh,
a huge
I'm
thing.
not
I agree.
discounting empathy.
I agree.
It's a huge
I
thing.
agree.
So bringing this into practical terms, like in what Paul is talking about with having empathy, let's say it is for the CEO. Just as well, it could be a client. But if you take the scenario of that they have these things that are going on, they have many irons, out there because of what they are managing with the company. Then in security itself, they'll have these things that are absolutely necessary right now. And then there's all these things that could happen. So if you take that and make it like a scenario, let's say you think that client or that CEO is like a woman walking into an emergency room. And yes, she might have heart disease. She might have diabetes forming. She might have other things coming on. But at this second, what's happening is she's giving birth right now. This is what needs to take precedence. And so if you look at the security practitioners being like the doctors, the really good ones, the ones that have empathy, would go, well, here, let me help you identify what needs to happen right now and understand that I still care and will help you get to these
Agreed.
things later on.
Agreed.
Also, as a security practitioner, I'm wondering if it's a silicone thing she ordered on Amazon or
It's a high
if
risk
she's
fake
actually
pregnancy.
pregnant.
Yeah.
I want
I mean, just after our interview with Emily, that's on the back of my mind at all times, Mandy.
I agree. I was totally, when she was saying that, I was like, there's going to be a Flipper Zero inside there. Yes. There's got to be some other things.
Yeah. But to that point, I mean,
I just going to say, I love how that brought us full circle. And I think that's a great ending point for the show. I'm totally going to order one of those things and wear it to my next family outing.
I can't wait.
And just not say
Can I
anything.
be invited? Can I be invited?
Yeah,
please.
Exactly. And I'm not going to say anything, and I'm just going to wear it, and I'm going to wait for someone to ask me the question. Like, who's going to be the first person to ask me the question?
Paul, you've been drinking a lot.
You've been drinking. Have you gained weight? And I'm like, what are you talking about? If I gained weight? I've been working out. What are you talking about?
My final observation, if we're trying to wrap this up, is a lot of what we've been talking about for the last 5-10 minutes is private sector. It's a different conversation than national security, national defense.
Yes, agreed.
You know, there's
It is and it isn't.
It isn't. Yes, Lee,
No.
but it is. And I'd like to emphasize
The health
that.
of our businesses affect our national security at the end of the day.
Jeff,
The resilience of our economy affects our
Jeff,
national
you need to read The
security.
Fifth Domain by Richard Clark.
I
do.
that comes
Yeah.
with things.
I
mean-
You you should read the Fifth Domain, Richard Clark. Based on our last 15 minutes, it's a good one. With that, I want to thank everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. We'll see you next time. Over and out.